So while IT is preparing, let me just say that this our presentation will be a bit more practical. We are going to share, the work that the Dairy Development Authority, with the support of the Food and Agriculture Organization here in Uganda, are leveraging on the parish development model to transition farmers from the subsistence to the market economy. Though the presentation will focus on the dairy sector, but we believe that the lessons will be important for other sectors of the economy. So IT, is it ready? IT?
IT, what is happening? Oh, it has come?
Yeah, I think it's coming. Okay, yeah, so that's it. Okay. But probably still, okay, good. So we are going to focus on the dairy sector, which holds significant economic importance in Uganda, to illustrate how useful the PDM could be. So before I start or deep dive into the presentation, let me give some key facts about the dairy sector in Uganda, just to set the background of our discussion. So in terms of production, last year or in the past 5 years, milk production in Uganda has increased by about 30%. And last year, for example, Uganda produced about 3.2 billion liters of milk. And this is important for food security and poverty. In terms of consumption, milk consumption in Uganda is increasing. And this is important and expected to increase further as the population increases and as more people get richer. And this shows a growing market for the sector as we invest in the parishes. In terms of export, dairy export last year was worth around 103 million USD. And this represents close to 90% of total livestock export in Uganda, which makes the sector quite important for economic growth. And the sector employs over 100,000 people, making it central for poverty reduction in Uganda. However, despite this potential and performance of the sector faces several challenges, some of which have been mentioned this morning. One is low productivity. For instance, a cow or a cattle in Uganda can produce about 5 liters of milk a day. Meanwhile, a cow in Kenya produces about 9 liters of milk in a day. That's almost double. And the difference is even worse if we consider a case like South Africa, where a cow can produce about 30 liters of milk a day. So productivity is low in the sector. And of course, there are many reasons. We can talk about limited access to improved breeds, among others. Another important challenge in this sector is limited export market. Over 80% of dairy products in Uganda are exported to Kenya. And why is this a problem? This is a problem because recently Kenya has been banning export products from Uganda from going to Kenya. And this has serious implications in which many farmers at parishes do not find market for their products. And why can Uganda not explore, other export countries or countries where to export? Because the dairy sector, for example, is predominantly informal, 70%. This has serious implications on quality control. For you to be able to access high premium markets, there's need to be assurance on quality and standards. So here lies the opportunity. We need to leverage on the parish development model to see how we can come up with targeted interventions to uplift these challenges and harness the opportunities in the dairy sector. And that's exactly what the DDA is doing with the support of the FAO, where we emphasize on evidence, on dialogues across communities, and an implementation of a policy action plan. We will have time to go into the briefs of this initiative. But before that, since we are talking about the parish development model, Yeah, just a brief. We all know that the PDM is a visionary framework of His Excellency to propel Uganda into the ranks of middle-income economies through interventions at the parish level. Central to the PDM are 7 pillars, which you can see them on the screen. But these pillars, they all have an area of focus, but together they all contribute toward holistic and sustainable development in local communities. A key cornerstone of the parish development model is that it is community-centered. Many of the challenges that households face in parishes, they are highly localized, and thus they need local solutions. For example, climate change affects communities differently. While some may experience drought, others experience pest and disease. And that's the beauty of the PDM, to address community-specific challenges and priorities. Another important feature of the PDM is very holistic. It looks at various aspects of livelihood improvement, agriculture, health, education, which are all important for economic growth. And lastly, the PDM promotes a diversified livelihood through investments in production, value addition, storage, and others. And this helps, to increase the potential of households to generate income. Now, here lies the question: how do we harness this very nice model to improve or transition farmers from subsistence to the markets or commercial sector? So this is the framework of the partnership. It's quite broad. It goes beyond dairy, but for the dairy sector, the collaboration is with the DDA. And to transition farmers, we emphasize on evidence and dialogues to identify priority areas of interventions within communities. And there are 4 studies which summarizes the evidence that we used in these initiatives. We have price incentives analysis, assessments of meat collection centers, post-harvest loss, and consumption. I will give the brief findings of this analysis and how relevant they are to the parish development model. The first one, IT? Okay, so the first one we do in okay. So the first study we have is to analyze price incentives, the price received by the farmers at the parishes. Why do we emphasize on price? Because price determines income, and income determines the ability of farmers at parishes to invest or access modern technologies to improve production, improve on storage, improve on market access, which are key to the first pillar of the parish development model. So if we want to transition farmers from subsistence to the money economy, there are many factors involved. But for sure, a fair and better price is a significant catalyst. So how do we ensure that farmers are receiving fair or better prices? By looking at the factors that affect prices that farmers receive at parish level. And these factors include government policies and market factors. Government policies, we are talking about import and export taxes, we are talking about price regulations, input subsidies, and market factors, we are referring to changes in demand and supply, as well as uncompetitive behavior where we have monopolistic tendencies, where a firm or a group of companies can influence the price that farmers are receiving. So to be able to estimate, the type of price that farmers are receiving, or if they are being incentivized or encouraged to invest in a sector, we use a set of indicators which are called the price incentive indicators, which are internationally recognized. But of course, because of the context of this forum, I'm not going to go into the details of these indicators. But the key point to take away is that these indicators, they simply estimate the difference between the domestic price and the international equivalent price. The domestic price is the actual price that farmers at parishes in dairy are receiving as a result of the existing policies and market conditions. On the other hand, the international equivalent price is an estimation of the price that they would have received in the absence of policies and more favorable market conditions. So we build the international equivalent price using the international price, but we adjust them for market access costs. So I think I will end there in terms of methodology. So what does the result say for Uganda? and on the dairy sector. So the result is clear that dairy farmers in Uganda, they receive low prices than what they would have received if they had better conditions. And the reasons are many, but just to name a few, the first important reasons are fluctuations in international demand for dairy. Like I mentioned at the introduction, 80% of Ugandan dairy products, they go to Kenya. And Kenya has been banning dairy products. And that has led to price fluctuations. We have many farmers, they're unable to find markets. And even those who find markets, they sell below their cost of production. This is real. This aggravates poverty and maintains farmers in subsistence agriculture. Other reasons include the dominance of processing companies. This was very much aggravated when we had just one milk processing companies around 2005, 2010. But now we have an increase in processing companies, but they still have control over prices that farmers are receiving at the parish level. Other reasons we can talk about include logistics, high transport costs to move milk from the parishes to the milk collection centers or up to the processors, which is very high. And our estimation includes that it's about 30% high than a more efficient sector like the case of South Africa. So the issue of logistics now takes us to the next evidence, is around assessing the performance of milk collection centers. Why do we assess the performance of milk collection centers? Because these MCCs, they provide storage and immediate market to farmers at the parishes. And we know storage and market access is important to the PDM. It's a pillar of the PDM. So if we want to increase storage and market access, the performance of these milk collection centers, they matter. So what does the result say for Uganda? Our analysis across the cattle corridor indicates that most of the milk collection centers are underperforming. For several reasons, we have low volumes of milk that they receive, especially during the dry season when productivity is low. And of course, when they receive low volumes, the per unit cost of chilling becomes very high and affects their profitability. Other reasons include high operation costs, transport I mentioned, but also power, which is very high and sometimes unreliable, especially for the MCCs, which they are located at parish level. We can also talk about limited access to clean water, and also importantly, high post-harvest loss. This is also important to the PDM. So when we assess post-harvest loss for the dairy sector, the result is a bit shocking, I would say. Our analysis indicates that 25% of milk produced at the parish level is lost before up to the level of the processor each year. I think that's a lot. And what it shows that most of the post-harvest losses, they occur at the milk collection centers, which they are found at the parishes, as well as the bulking centers. So what are the main reasons why we have post-harvest losses? We have rejection of milk by processors as a result of poor quality. I think quality has already been emphasized here. I'll just move ahead. Then we also have testing and grading, where some of the equipments used are not very modern, and so there's a lot of spillage that occurs. Then lack of market, which I've mentioned. So that's it for post-harvest loss. Then the next study, we try to analyze milk consumption. It's important that for every product we promote at the parish level, we ensure there's a market for it. If not, farmers will be frustrated at the end, as mentioned, I think, on Moringa. So our analysis on milk consumption indicates that per capita milk consumption is increasing. In the last 10 years or 15, consumption has increased by about 40%. So it shows a growing market. So there is opportunity for the farmers and for the sector. And of course, as expected, it is largest in the western region where we have, which is a center of milk production in Uganda. So that's the end of the evidence. But also importantly, as people may be expecting the solutions. So we got this evidence. From there, we had to move to policy dialogues across communities in Barara, in Wakiso, and also a national dialogue in Kampala, where we showed or presented these dialogues to the community members, to farmers, to agribusiness actors, all players across the value chains, and even government agencies were represented in these various dialogues. So from these dialogues, we had a set of priorities that they think that government and development partners should consider if we want to transition farmers to a market economy. So we have demand, we have production, we have value addition, and we have marketing. For the sake of time, I'm not going to detail all of them. But just to emphasize on demand, because that came out clearly, very strongly on why farmers are receiving low prices. So for every product we are promoting, we must ensure there is demand at domestic level and also international. We can also find markets. For the case of dairy in Uganda, to increase the stakeholders identified, there is need to increase domestic demand through nutrition campaign on the importance of consuming milk, and also through school milk program, which is what some organizations are already doing. So on this domestic milk consumption, we all know that Uganda produces less milk than Kenya, but Kenya is importing milk from Uganda. So which shows that Kenya is consuming more milk than Uganda. So there's potential to expand domestic consumption. There's also opportunity to look at export markets. We need to diversify the export. 80% going to Kenya, that's too much dependence, and it really affects the sector. And if we want to expand export, an important parameter is quality. We must invest in quality, which is on the section on production. We must ensure we have quality products, and we must also emphasize on market access through transport infrastructure, cold chain facilities, but also importantly, we must facilitate, traders and farmers to become formal. You cannot export when you are operating in informality. And some of the solutions are there: training, certification, and formalization. Also value addition. But now, how do we concretely, what are some of the concrete actions, that have been or that are currently going on to implement some of these recommendations? So I'm going to call the custodians of these recommendations and policy documents, which is Kenneth Otikal from the Dairy Development Authority, to tell us what's the way forward or what has been done in terms of implementation of these recommendations. So Kenneth, please, over to you.
Thank you, Nana. Let's now give him an applause, and let's have Kenneth to conclude on that subject matter.
Okay, thank you so much, Nana, for this elaborate display of the findings that we did in our policy dialogues and all the evidence that we had during all these studies. So we consolidated all this into a tool taking into consideration the government planning framework and also harnessing the opportunities that we have under the PDM. So from all the recommendations, all the actions to address all the bottlenecks that we identified from those assessments, we came up with a list of prioritized interventions at parish level. Of course, we put them at immediate, short-term, and long-term, and also assign responsible parties. It was kind of an actionable matrix and a plan for all the dairy stakeholders to implement so that we can, uplift our communities at parish level from, peasantry to commercial agriculture. So in just a snapshot, we're going to share with you what we actually did in the first 2 years in relation to the Dairy Policy Action Plan. So we managed actually to train more than 2,935 farmers that we organized under our farmer groups and our best, improved dairy husbandry practices. These are actually, pasture conservation, pasture management to actually bridge the gap of seasonality. And then also we managed to distribute dairy farming inputs to support milk quality production. We gave out to our organized farmers that we identified at parish level, we gave them pasture seeds. We also gave them some small-scale mechanized chaff cutters and also some milk cans for demonstrational purposes. At our Entebbe Dairy Training School, we also managed to skill more than 158 dairy stakeholders on small-scale validation, the one that you can do at cottage level, in yogurt processing, making ice cream. And then as we continue engaging these stakeholders at parish level, we managed to license more than 1,825 dairy businesses. Of course, the majority of them have been existing, but also we have new upcoming ones in the entire dairy value chain. Over the space of 2 years, we also managed to actually, like Nana has emphasized, the marketing and the storage facilities. This is our core infrastructure. We managed to renovate 4 milk collection centers in Katakwi, Kitgum, and then also most recently in Kakoge, in Nakasongola. And all these are supposed to, stimulate production and provide a direct market for these farmers at parish level. And then also lastly, we distributed some milk coolers to farmer groups, the ones who have actually registered adequate volumes of milk to help them on the post-harvest losses as identified in our report. How we visualize the PDM is we target these really a small scale farmers who can produce milk, but they really cannot get it to the next level of the value chain. For example, we actually anticipate probably a youth like Stephen Okello from Amolatar, who cannot access the market. He can buy, from the parish circle. He can access 1 million from the PDM circle, buy a bicycle and a milk can, and transport milk to a nearby milk collection center. We also visualize Maria Atukunda, maybe from Ishaka Bushenyi, who can access low interest PDM funds to buy a heifer for zero grazing and then produce milk for sale. And then lastly, also Abdul Kato, maybe from Mukono, can also access funds under the parish development model to fabricate a milk boiler. We scale him, and then he can do value addition in yogurt and then probably access the local market. So in line with the PDF, yes, we have started a journey. However, we still have some gaps in harnessing the PDM. We have actually observed some slow progress in strengthening other pillars. So this kind of creates an imbalance in the interventions that are really meant to reinforce our interventions. For example, we really have a huge demand of storage and marketing facilities, the milk collection centers. Amidst our small budgets, we have a lot of requests, more than 80 applications for a milk cooler in southwestern and central Uganda. So there's a lot of demand for that. And then also we have a challenge of mindset change. So long as we have funds already at parish level, and then our farmers have not really been so much brought on board to orientate them on the commercial agriculture. Apparently, people can access money and do other things, marry other women, without guidance. They can also engage in other enterprises that really don't make them competitive locally. So these are some of the areas we need to bridge the gap and then reinforce other pillars as well, especially on the pillars of mindset change and also heavy investment on production and storage infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kenneth, for that contribution. I think one thing you can see is that both FAO and DDA have tried their part, but they can't do everything. I think what is lacking among many things is, I don't know whether we have banks in the room, but banks should have by now produced designed products which can help production, especially at the dairy level. I was in Kenya in 2005, and I visited a farm in the Thika area, and I found that Equity Bank at that time had a product where they would give funds to somebody with a dairy cow, which is in calf, and they would be able to calculate the projection of the milk, and the only engagement would be that when this cow produces, the milk will be paid through a system where they can deduct their loans. I don't know whether we have had some products like those ones here. I've discussed with Stanbic, but they are yet to give me an answer in that direction. The other one is insurance, which maybe would be linked to climate funding, because you have had their losses during, let's say, the dry season, both on the farmer who loses his volume of milk or her volume of milk, but also on the person handling storage and post-harvest handling who loses volumes and can no longer match the investment costs like power and the rest. So these are some of the things we need. Then secondly and finally on this one, capacity building should be also directed to strategic people. And under decentralization, we have our staff, for example, production coordinators, who are vets and agriculture. We have commercial officers. These are the ones who need to be skilled to think properly in terms of stepping up production. Extension staff. But most importantly, we have our political groups there. In every district, there is a member of the executive called the secretary, responsible for production. But you may find this person does not do anything in the course of his or her business because he has not been given skills. The same applies to the sub-county. But most importantly, at every parish in Uganda and at every village, we have a member of an executive at that level responsible for production and environmental protection. But no one knows these people. And if they were skilled and strengthened, to me, I think they can help us to carry forward our mission of increasing productivity in areas like dairy production. Members, thank you very much for that one. Let me now call upon Dr. Medina Goroba from EPRC to take us through how can PDM help to connect farmers to the markets and value chains. Dr. Medina.
Thank you, PS. Good morning, everyone. Hope it's morning. Is it afternoon? So after what the PS has talked about and colleagues from DDA, in actual sense, they've talked about the practical element of it. I was going to give you the actual things they need to do. Even the lamentations talked about, probably there's something you missed, such that the book of lamentations that Dr. Bona talked about can actually be diminished. So when I was given this to talk about that, is the PDM really, how is it trying to connect farmers to markets and value chains? It's something that I think, PS, the design has been really pretty well done in terms of how PDM is connecting, it aims to connect farmers to markets and value chains. So what I think I'll touch on more is step 4 on the issues around how can we do it practically in terms of connecting these farmers to markets that PDM probably has really well outlined, but not sequenced in terms of what they need to do first. So I think this is just a graphical framework, I think, for what PS talked about, that really the issue is shifting these subsistence workers to money in terms of using the resource they have to grow these resources and wealth. And I think the major focus of why PDM is looking for the 39% of the subsistence workers or the subsistence households to move them into the money economy is because partly because the 24% of these subsistence farmers or households are actually in agriculture. So I think this should be the emphasis of even the subsistence economy, since it's quite huge. So we need to ensure that actually production that they're talking about, DDA, that's just one commodity, and then processing, marketing is actually well ensured to deliver this issue. So out of the 7 PDM pillars, I'm only touching on one, and that is agricultural value chain development, which is very clear. It has 3 issues: production, there's also an element of storage, processing, and markets. I'll not go through these, but because these are the issues that PDM outlines, in terms of the activities they intend to do to shift these farmers to markets. But are they doing it well? Is this the way they need to follow it through? In terms of organizing and coordinating farmers, that's right. That's how they need to do. Linking the organized farmers to groups, yes, that's correct. Some support these support groups, even either through finance, businesses, that's actually also correct, to the end where they need to prioritize what they need to do. Again, PDM has it right. But how should they do it? How should they organize this? So this is the PS. If you do not see this, then you know the book of implementation is going to come forth. Even as EPRC comes to evaluate, you'll be seeing this coming forth when you're not connecting or connecting the dots. First is the issue of opportunities, and that is what he talked about. Without the right market, the list of market opportunities where these farmers are going to sell then you get it wrong. Because recall, value chain is not something you're thinking of at the base. Value chain is thinking big, and you're thinking money. So it's not something you're going to throw in there in PDM to hide that you're going to connect farmers to markets. But without first listing where these market opportunities for the 18 commodities that NPS sets forth. Of course, as EPRC, we had said there are too many, too many to deal with. But of course, NPS said EPRC had proposed only a few. They needed to include in some more to see how best to go about it. But value chain needs to be very focused, very opportunistic, to ensure that this money flows into the pockets of these farmers and households. So first, you need to speak to these supermarkets. Those are some of the market opportunities. The hotel operators, this is what we have. And I think that's what even Dr. Sekitoleko talked about, local, before even you think out. Because you begin to think out when you're expanding your production base. So then the schools, these are opportunities we have. The local traders, even Aponye, before, I know it's still operational, that's part of the market, the wholesaler, in terms of aggregating. So what are some of these opportunities do we have? And what I'm talking about is one of the very important points to talk about in this step is the farmers adapting this attitude that it's not what they need to do, what they usually do, but to change. If I'm selling tomatoes and the group is coming together, but the opportunity is around Irish growing, and you've thought about it, then how do you change this to ensure that you meet this market that's actually growing? Second, out of this step, we need to ensure that the markets we're looking for and the opportunities are for a small number of farmers to harness this opportunity for growth. Because, you know, when your two men again controlling some of these dynamics of groups becomes a bit difficult. So it's very important that the farmers are part of something very specific and the group is not too big to manage. And third, we do not need to stake in assumptions. In this value chain thinking, we don't deal with assumptions, ladies and gentlemen. I assume Kenya will take my milk. No, we do not think that way. I do not think Nabisunsa will take my tomatoes. No, I do not think to assume. I need the evidence. Is there a demand for this tomato by these schools? Is there a demand for my milk by Kenya, and at what degree? So markets are very, very critical. The first issue that PDM needs to focus on, even as they talk about with these and aggregate the farmers to move ahead. So we can. So then the next step we are trying to ensure that PDM follows with these numerous activities they have is the farmer groups themselves have to identify what they can do and what they cannot do, such that it's easier for them to understand the dynamics of the markets they're going to engage. So the farmer groups have to understand what they can offer better than those who are already in the market. So probably Kenya had also other competitors of milk. So we have farmers, they are organizing for this milk, but what are their opportunities to replace all those that are there, to make them more attractive than anyone else who could have actually supplied milk to Kenya? So that's why they can easily throw you out in case you're not producing, because probably Mozambique is doing it better than Uganda, and they are more attracted to the way they are doing. So that kind of attraction is very critical in terms of identifying what the farmers can do, what they cannot do, and how they can be able to meet the gaps in there. So what we have to start doing is they have to be really realistic in terms of the assessment of the market, looking around the farmers in terms of their priorities, the skills they have. You don't start by organizing, then you start trying to skill them. They need to first see they have that skill and the potential to grow that skill as we go forward. In terms of the post-harvest handling services they have, such that it's not necessarily government-led, but also there can be supportive frameworks within the farmer groups in the societies that can actually support them to do issues around post-harvest handling, in terms of storage, even the attitudes that are around to change and cooperate. Because without cooperation within these groups, again, failure will be there. Because there'll be blame games, because that means you don't understand the limitations, you do not understand what they can do. And at the end of the day, the farmers need to know who they'll get their inputs from. Is it Victoria Seeds? Can they be able to supply them? Are they of quality? And at what time can they be able to get this kind of inputs? In terms of even certification of fertilizer, because we have some markets that certain fertilizer usage is not going to be taken in terms of the products you actually produce. So it's important to know who will supply you these fertilizers, chemical usage, and in what quantities and in what quality, such that everything is balanced out. So PS, if you do not know the kind of subsistence farmers and how they identify themselves to formalize these groups, to make sure they produce one of the commodities they've identified, and where they're going to get these inputs, you need to ask them these questions as they're actually formulating some of these groups. And third, in these steps, is you need to put these two together. In case of the market you are having, do you have the skill to produce for that market? Do you have the land available to aggregate such that the volumes you're going to produce are not just, tomorrow you say, sorry, we could not make it because we do not understand you? No, those are just lame excuses. That means you do not do it right. So the farmers have to actually understand what kind of extra benefits they're going to offer their customers to make them change from their existing suppliers. So you have to score each element of your market based on the land you have, based on some of the inputs you have in terms of storage. If I store it, will it be the shelf life that is actually involved in terms of keeping this within our shelves for the market? Will it be agreeable? So these are things that even as you're planning DDA in your action plan, those are things you have to tick off. Do they have the capacity? Do they have the skill to develop? Do they have the actual support systems in terms of foliage to feed these farmers such that we do not lament that they do not have the milk quantities do not actually meet the market? In the fourth step, we need to issue around how you investigate your shortlist, the issue around the surveying your local markets. You need even to go around actually do some market surveys in terms of looking at the management level. Visit these markets. Is it what they have? Because issues around consistency matter. You do not want today you have secured the South African market and tomorrow you cannot meet it. And that's what we have. I know, Vic, if you have mentioned some of these signing of agreements, we sign all these agreements and we cannot meet volumes. Why? We did not take planning to understand the market. We do not understand how to make sure we meet the quality, quantity, delivery timelines. But we have put this PDM to remove them from subsistence to value chains, and value chain is not small, and these people need to change. So in case they are changing, they have to be very sure that the groups will be able to deliver these quantities on time. You get it? So in case you have these big supermarkets, these supermarkets are not going to wait for that Ugandan shelf that they've given you to wait for the products when you are ready. You should have planned it in advance that if I'm growing these cabbages, and this time, no matter the weather, they'll be able to be in those shelves, whichever they may be, within either local markets or international markets. And then, at the end of the day, we don't need to look about issues around the cheapest price, because sometimes some people are just willing to take anything. After all, I had it in surplus. But that's not going to get you out of the wealth economy we want to achieve for you. In terms of wealth, in terms of money into the pockets. We don't want just the best, just the least that can come in. We want what's best, not the cheapest, but products that are suitable for these markets and where they're actually also competing. So we need to understand this. And practically, if you do not want some of the stories you hear about, I think sometimes you can hear that Gro Moringa, I think they talked about it, but the farmers were not involved at first. Someone understood the market, but the farmers were not involved to understand this market. So when the market changed, they did not know where to start from because they were not connected to this market. So we need to be able to put some of these markets together. That way they can understand how they can evolve. Because it's very important for them not to be disappointed when some of these markets have been canceled or when the market of Nairobi closes either for surplus, but be able to have been foreseeing some of these opportunities because we're part of the action, we're part of the change to make it happen. So as we are, the last two steps is that farmers must decide. And I think that's one of the things the PDM is good at. They must decide what to do. Because if you list all these 18 commodities about what's best for you, these aggregated groups must decide what they have to do, come together to decide either they're growing which whether it's dairy, as he has pointed out, or they are going to be part of the wheat value chain. Because as I've emphasized, ladies and gentlemen, value chains is targeting higher value markets, not your normal, if you want to change in terms of wealth and sustainability. So picking the right person is critical. So I might be dealing with the minister here, but because he's my friend, might be a good partner. When we are chatting daily issues, might not be a good business partner when you're doing business. So you have to understand who you're picking. Maybe Albert will be my good friend because he's a good business sense, and we all have some similar ideologies. So it's very critical in this sense. Yes, Richard? He is a good person. You can't deal with Albert. So as economists, sometimes Albert and I might have the same ideology, maybe in market, in forecasting. So we're together. But he might not believe in him. So it's very important he picks me over him. That's why the fact that he's a good friend. So that's the issue we are driving out. So you have to work with people who are committed. They are willing to take over. If it's 10 acres you need, how much can you bring together? And that way you plan it out and discuss the ways to improve and move on. So meetings are critical. That's what you've talked about. Get farmers together with the most crucial people on board who are going to drive this. If it's a transporter, they have to be there. If it is a processor, they have to be there. Within the supply chains of inputs, they have to be part of this journey to move together. They have to understand the trading conditions. If I'm in beef business, I know that if you're transporting your beef, they say it's stressed. You know, the meat can be stressed when you transport it for long distances. And this is something we see, even on our Ugandan roads. Sometimes I tell myself, what are the veterinary officers talking about this in terms of value for the meat, for the markets we are talking about? Because they will tell you that if you actually lump all these cows or the bulls together and they travel long distances, the meat is already stressed in terms of its quality, in terms of what is going to be taken, in terms of the price actually you receive. So these kind of persons, the meetings are critical to understand such that we deliver for this market. And lastly, the plan. I'm quite happy that the Dairy Authority has the plan, but recall, this plan I'm talking about, DDA, is not a plan for the dairy sector, a plan for the aggregated farmers. They must have a concrete plan that if I'm dealing with this value chain of French beans, this is what I need in terms of setting out the detail, even in terms of meetings. You know, when you have meetings, how much shall we deduct? If someone needs transport, all those have to be in these action plans. Are we together? So we're planning in terms of the inputs you get, production, post-harvest processing, the grading, the timeliness, all have to be there and then cost them. Such that what the financial component of PDM can be related. Sometimes I'm wondering how they're giving these resources if these persons don't have plans, especially for those that are aggregating to come together to produce for markets. Are those PDM finances actually financing concrete plans from these farmers and actually costed plans, such that we can know how much PDM can support, and then the banking sector can give in to support these farmers because they have futuristic thinking and visions. So colleagues from the Uganda National Agriculture Farmers Federation actually talked about issues of organizations that are critical for commercializing, investments in farmer organizations, which they talked about, and infrastructure, which is there, and above all, extension. Because at the basis of it is extension. In terms of the CDOs he talked about, the actual farmers, in terms of supporting the farmers in knowing which inputs to use, and these commercial officers to help them look for markets and also understand these markets. Because then what are they doing in that level? If they need capacity, then they're in the wrong job at that point. You need to make sure they know what they're doing for the support systems they are taking away. So I had 4 takeaways prepared. One is how we can leverage on our extension officers, which up to now, they are not being financed or increased in terms of numbers to support farmers to actually do their job. So I'm wondering how these groups are going to be supported when even our extension base is so thin and not voting as a vision to make sure these work. And second, the budget. which has been, I know FAP had put around 10%, but up now the budget for actual issues around agriculture general is still around 3%. And then third, if we are to leverage on the pillar 3 of the PDM on finance, to be in sync with pillar 1, especially on how we can sustain the organized and established action plans from our groups. And lastly, we have good models that even had been mentioned. Some of these models, like the UBL model where they had organized their farmers, we have the market, and then we have some of the farmer groups that actually have already the markets. We can try to understand how they're doing it. And then we see how PDM can leverage to make it work and reduce that book of lamentations might actually come forth if we are not doing well. That's a bit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Give her an applause, Dr. Madina, for those comments, especially the 6 takeaways and the 7 steps. I think I want to agree with Dr. Madina. The only thing I can add before I call to come in is just to mention that let's do it right. And I found that Equity Bank would go to a tea farmer and they look at his trees and they're able to project these trees when they will go into fruition. And they even project what is likely to come up. And then they would now support this farmer with funds. But in addition, they would connect this farmer with the one who is going to buy that tea. But thirdly, the bank itself would carry out extension because they are partners. If that loan collapses, it's a problem for them, not for the farmer loan. So they would even make sure they carry out extension, which would help this tea to come out without any problem. So let's design the right products, let's have the right partnerships, and let's go down to the farmers and do business there than being far away. And this would be supporting decentralization. Thank you very much, Dr. Madina. Let me now call Eri to come and deliver his presentation on how can PDM help to link producers and processors to external markets. Eri.
All protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin from where Madina has stopped and thank her very much. I have seen, when you look at the PDM, I have seen a lot of obsession with getting money from government. And everybody, you hear, this parish has not got this money, this one has not got this money, and that, and the politics that goes with it. I think what is important for us is, and for me, is that the parish development model is intended to monetize the economy, to commercialize the economy, to get people who are working for their own stomachs out of subsistence. And then they can make money and the economy can grow. If we don't achieve this, then the parish development model, according to me, will have failed. And we need to do it in only 5 years. Like investments in business, any company that starts a business, especially manufacturing concern, must invest in 5 years. If they are lucky in 3 years, by 5 years they begin earning zero profits. And then upwards, they begin making money. let's look at the parish development model and farming as a business. It will make sense then that our people will get out of poverty. And therefore, at Uganda Export Promotion Board and myself, we are looking at the pillar of production, processing, and marketing, but also we are looking at pillar 5, which is about information, but also mindset change. The parish development model is supposed to monetize the economy, to commercialize the economy, and therefore the rural sector should get out of subsistence, to commercialize agriculture, and therefore we should look at what you produce for the market and you get money out of that. And markets do matter. I met a member of parliament recently who told me he's from a municipality that when he became MP, he found they had only 4,000 birds, chicken, and then with his effort, they became 10,000 birds. And he said, now we don't have a market. Just only 10,000 birds, now we don't have a market. So we need markets. The parish development model is supposed to reduce informal sector, the whole informal sector and subsistence. And also, it is supposed to widen taxes because many people in rural areas are not paying taxes. You will not run economies without taxing. So we need to do it right so we can tax. And since the Commissioner for Uganda Revenue Authority and the Governor Bank of Uganda are here, I have this advice. Please, and I'm saying please, to widen the tax base, begin with one thing. Please merge the NIN, the national identification number, with the TIN immediately. Please, and you'll thank me later. Think about it. You'll thank me later, I mean it. Because then we can reduce informality by catching you at the NIN level. Because with the NIN, you cannot escape. For every service you get out of this country, you should look at the NIN. And therefore, to have the TIN and the NIN, and then the two systems cannot talk, then we'll have challenges. But if we do that, we widen the tax base in addition to doing what we are doing. Since I don't have enough time and I talked yesterday, I don't want to waste time here. I simply want to tell you this. If you cannot produce things for the market, you are finished. You can keep begging. You can go to World Bank and they tell you we cannot give you money because of X, Y, and Z of emotions. I hate using the word politics. Because of emotions, they withdraw the money, but you don't have the money because their tax base is not wide. And please begin thinking about PIT, the personal income tax, because other developed countries are making more money by using PIT. The role of government is supposed to be paramount in a developmental state by supporting the country with finding markets, helping companies penetrate markets. The role of government is to undertake aggressive and extensive marketing and promotion, and hold the people and take them to the markets. Once they have reached there, they will get export receipts, we will get jobs, we will tax, and the jobs will increase. And once you do that, we will be right. Let me give you 2 or 3 examples of products that we've been thinking about. For a long time, and the colonialists didn't tell us, for example, that cocoa was important for us. They told us coffee was. The other day, the taxman is here, but since agriculture is not yet taxed very well, I sold 4 bags of cocoa and I got 5.4 million Uganda shillings. 4 bags of cocoa. So think of the right products and let's market Uganda. Please, let's market Uganda and we make money. Lastly, let's remove politics from the parish development model. because everybody, I see people will get this money and eat it and not use it. If PDM is to work, it is vital that the economy benefits from it. Remove politics. Market Uganda, support the rural areas to be in the monetary economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eri. Of course, we need a deconstruction of what you mean by removing politics. I hope it's not the rolling back the state and other issues. But we hear you correctly. We need to look for the money. So thank you very much. Let me now call upon Mr. Goloba Lwanga to come, and you have 4.5 minutes to discuss the presentations. Mr. Goloba.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Goloba Lwanga. I work with the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, currently as the Manager, Financial Inclusion Pillar, under the Parish Development Model. So, as I discuss the presentations, I will, of course, discuss them from that perspective of the Financial Inclusion Pillar. Now, in Dr. Madina's presentation, she showed you there are 7 pillars of the Parish Development Model, and that those pillars are interlinked, they're interdependent. They're not mutually exclusive. So the issues of sequencing, the issues of some pillars being behind others, hopefully at the end of my discussion, you will have better perspective on those issues. So first off, I want to begin by saying in the financial inclusion pillar, government is providing affordable capital to the parishes. 1 trillion shillings, 1.059 trillion shillings every financial year. But those funds under that, what we call the Parish Revolving Fund, are exclusively for funding activities along the agricultural value chain. I want to repeat that. The capital that government is providing to the parishes under the Parish Development Model are exclusively for financing activities along the agricultural value chain. Dr. Medina mentioned, I think, and the previous presenters have talked about the agricultural value chain, and it's production, processing, storage, and marketing. So those funds are exclusively for those activities. And we have issued or put in place guidelines to ensure that that happens. Now, the way government is proceeding is that under this financial inclusion pillar, government adopted a phased approach to implementation, a 3-phased approach to implementation. And the three phases are: one, what we call establishment phase. The establishment phase is a phase that has concluded with last financial year. It ran over 2 financial years, and I'll explain what was involved in that phase. And then there is a phase that we've begun with this financial year called the stabilization phase. It will run for this financial year and the next financial year. And then finally, we will have a phase called the sustainability and exit phase, the final phase, 3 phases. And that phase will be 2025, 2026, and beyond. Now, in those phases, but I think I need to also mention, the phases, we adopted that approach to ensure that at the end of this journey, we have a critical mass of profitable, competitive, and market-oriented agro-enterprises at each of these 10,594 parishes. So that is the aim. So to achieve that, we broke up the intervention in those 3 phases. Now, what is in the phase that we have just concluded? And I want to speak to maybe the issue of some pillars appearing to be ahead of the others. In the establishment phase, which I mentioned was the last 2 financial years, we had, of course, maybe use the words mobilizing and sensitizing the public, the communities, and that was led by His Excellency the President, trying to sell this direction, this intervention, this strategy to the Ugandans. And that happened in that phase that we have concluded, and then the communities were organized at the parishes. At each of the 10,594 parishes, the communities were organized into two important groupings. One is what we call the enterprise group, and the other is what we call the parish development model circle. So at each of the parishes in Uganda, as we speak now, government has facilitated the formation of enterprise groups, and these enterprise groups are based on enterprises, or I think what Dr. Medina has been referring to as value chains. 7 value chains or enterprises. So in Dr. Medina's presentation, she talked about the beginning should have been market analysis, and I think, Chair, I am pleased to note that with all the presentations we've had here today, they are aligned largely with what government has been implementing or the general direction of government going forward with respect to PDM. So the market analysis that Dr. Medina has talked about, that has been done by the Ministry of Agriculture and other government agencies to come up with these 7 priority enterprises or value chains. They looked at the rate of return per acre per annum, the market potential, and at the end of that process, advised Cabinet, and Cabinet adopted for the parish development model to prioritize dairy, coffee, fish, fruits, poultry, piggery, and food crops. So there was a process that happened that gave us these priority enterprises or value chains, and then the Ministry of Agriculture zoned the country. So when we got to formation of enterprise groups, the communities at the parishes were advised by the extension staff along the priority value chains for PDM and the analysis that had been done in the zoning by the Ministry of Agriculture. So at the moment, we have around 109,000 enterprise groups profiled in the country. Such enterprise groups formed along the lines of those priority value chains that I've mentioned. Now, those enterprise groups then came together to give us what we call the parish development model circle. The parish development model circle is one for every parish, only one, and it is registered as a cooperative under the Cooperative Societies Act. That parish development model circle is, I want to say, it is a center for integrated business, integrated service delivery at that parish, but focusing maybe mainly on the 3 functions. 1 is production, 2 is collective marketing, and then 3 is the financial services. So PS has talked about the innovation he saw in Kenya, and he has asked, why aren't the banks doing that here? Our parish development model circle will do such innovations here with the financial services functions that it takes on. It will also do production and then the collective marketing. So this parish development model circle is a multi-purpose cooperative established at each and every parish of Uganda. And I want to also say, because it is a cooperative with a cooperative identity, the members and leaders at that parish make the business decisions. The parish development model circle is not a government department, it's not a government entity, it is a private entity established at that parish, and the members and leaders at that parish make their own decisions. Now, in the establishment phase, in addition to having these formations come in place, we've also had preliminary training for the leaders that are running these new institutions, on governance, governing this new institution, and good agricultural practices on the selected enterprises that they have chosen to focus on. We have also had profiling of households in Uganda. So there was a question of identifying the farmer in Dr. Madina's presentation. Who is this participant? What is their skill? What is the resources available to them? We have, under the parish development model, a system that has been developed by the Ministry of ICT called the Parish Development Management Information System. And in that system, we have been able to profile all our participants before they cross over to the groupings, the enterprise groups and circles. So at the moment, we've been able to profile 6.5 million households out of an estimated 9.8 million households. So that information is available with us on that system, and we use it to understand the household we're working with, because the profiling is for all households in Uganda, and also the communities, because the profiling is both the household and the communities where these households subsist. So that has also happened in the establishment phase. And then in the establishment phase, we've had government capitalize or provide this affordable capital to the parishes. So as of today, government has provided 1.15 trillion shillings to 10,585 parishes across this country. Those resources, as I mentioned in the beginning, are exclusively, Dr. Madina talked about sinking in one of the takeaways, Pillar 1 and Pillar 3. They're exclusively for funding the agricultural value chain activities in the selected enterprises. Now, moving on to the new phase, the stabilization phase, the second phase, which we have started with this financial year, there are things that will continue into this phase from the previous phase, such as continuing capitalization of the parishes. Government will capitalize every financial year these parishes with 1 trillion shillings for the purposes that I've explained, and also continue profiling both the households and the communities. But we will also see special focus on a bit more activities, particularly under Pillar 1, or the agricultural value chain. And I want to emphasize 3 that government is prioritizing in the immediate. 1 is inputs, availability of quality inputs. Right now in our market, we have around 40% of the inputs fake, but government will prioritize, or is prioritizing, inputs, the provision of quality inputs. And the way we are approaching this is that government will support large producers to produce quality foundational seed and breeding stock. So when I say large producers, I'm talking institutions such as the Uganda Prison Service with large chunks of land, the National Enterprise Corporation under the UPDF, the Prison Service, NARO, NAGRIC, and other large farmers. So those will be supported to make sure we have these quality inputs on the market, because now the demand for those inputs, given the money that government has provided, of course, will outmatch has already outmatched the supply. Now, the second area that government is prioritizing is extension. I think we've heard in the presentation by our colleagues from DDA and FAO that because of poor handling of milk, it is being rejected at processors, and the farmers are losing. So government is also emphasizing extension. How? 1 is through the use of media, and we will use media extensively going forward, particularly the radios, to reach the rural farmer, our rural farmer. 2 is through things like farm education barazas. So those 2 will be relied on much more heavily in this stabilization phase to be able to support the extension so that we can have the right quality and the right standards of the produce. Then finally, on the issues under the agricultural development that government is emphasizing on in this new phase is the issue of processing. Processing for value addition. So still in the presentation by DDA, they mentioned, and I think Mr. Twehe also mentioned, the issue of this processing capacity, our processing capacity. Right now, we have heard that the milk is largely sold unprocessed, 70%. We want to have that changed so that our producers and farmers can get more for what they have produced. And how are we going to achieve that? Two ways. One is the existing processing capacity that we have. We must ensure that it is operating at optimal capacity, and we're going to ensure that. So the milk coolers, the processing plants that we have, that the studies have told us are operating at suboptimal level. MAIF, or the Ministry of Agriculture, is already working out a strategy to ensure that for all the processing capacity we have, and that government particularly has invested in, it's operating at optimal capacity, so that we can process this product, the PDM product, before it goes to the market. And then finally, on processing is large factories, large processors. So government is also is promoting that, large factories. We talked about FDI in the earlier session. So FDI and the local investors, we want to encourage them to set up these large processing facilities to be able to take on the PDM products that production that is going to increase, of course, given the intervention of government. Chair, the time I want to ask to stop there. Thank you very much.
That discussing points. Now, members, we are time barred. So once again, I'm also going to invoke my powers and reduce question time to 4 minutes only. So can I have, I can see Dr. Victoria. Okay, I'll just speak these 5. Doctor, and then I'll come here 2, 3, 4, 5, and Mukunda 6. But keep it short, kindly. Time is not on our side. So, Doctor.
Thank you. I really don't know where to start. Start with Madina or start with Golova. But I think I'm going to start at the beginning. It has been a long time since I was last talked to, like Mr. Golova was talking to us. You know, behind his demeanor, I could see, this is it, take it or leave it. Hey. But that notwithstanding, I'm an old woman. I'm going to say what I want to say. Madam Madina suggested that do not start off by organizing them, skill them. I want to add, use skilled people to skill them. 2, I want to talk to URA, and I'm glad he's here. URA, Madina said before you came in, not to assume. Get to know them, then work with them. 3, she said, skill them. We are looking at parishes. We are looking at value chains. Mr. Golova said they have profiled all the parishes. I wonder what part of the profiling my parish, Nakawa, is. Because we are a consumer parish, but nobody has talked to us about that. We are talking about markets. If you are talking about the value chain, look at the parishes which are producing, look at the parishes which are consuming, specifically on milk. There are people who are lactose intolerant, but fortunately now Uganda has developed. They produce yogurt which has no lactose, but then most people don't know. So we need that type of skilling as a market. Secondly, we are talking about taxes, and I'm glad once again Mr. Msinguzi is here. Mr. Msinguzi, that tax, presumptive tax of 20%, which you are charging dairy farmers. Currently, a few months back, milk was selling at about 1,200. Now we are selling at about 500. The presumptive tax was already set at 20%. Can I know who set the 20%? 2, why is it selective? You know, currently it is like you want to be taxed, organize. You don't want to be a tax incentive. You want a tax incentive, don't organize. Nobody will tax you. How? If you are in the cattle corridor, if you are in dairy and you are organized, you have a cooperative, you sell your milk to this dairy factory, they will tax you. But if you are informal, no tax. 2, if you go into beef and you take a 20 heads of cattle to the Katale Komubulo, the mobile markets which happen once a week, huge as those cows are, we shall not see them, and URA will not tax you. So the 20% presumptive tax does not apply to beef. Can we be universal, Mr. Tax Gentleman? Finally, when you say that every parish has been profiled and every parish has got to confile to the 18 products, where do we, the people of Butambala, stand? Because in Butambala we do 2 things. We do ginger, and that is the headquarters of ginger in Uganda, and we are very organized with the cooperatives and all that. It is not one of the 18 products. And we also do Mira. Since you have profiled every parish, can you please tell us where we are? I thank you.
Thank you. Victoria gave us a presentation, but for us, she has been at it for 37 years. Julius, give us a question. We want questions so that these panelists can respond to questions.
Quickly, thanks to Chair. I want to disagree with Eddie, because yesterday we agreed that he's the other side and I'm still this side of negotiations. So he should be executing, not making recommendations. And as such, I want to know what preparations he has put in place to market the products that are going to come out of PDM, because that is a primary job. The second one is, I have also heard that we have identified enterprises, mapped them. I just also wanted to know whether these enterprises were based on the markets that we are going to sell. Because if Japan wanted squared watermelons, I don't know if this is a part of the enterprises that were identified and were told farmers to implement. Lastly, is the question of organizing. PS, this is to you. I want to also know how far we have invested in ensuring that farmers are organized, again, for a particular market. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go this side. I think I saw somebody. Yes, let's go here.
Richard Newfarmer, the International Growth Center. This has been a terrific panel. I have a question for Ellie and the folks on dairy, which is that some time ago, the EAC put in place a platform to negotiate non-tariff barriers, to allow the private sector to surface these so that they could be negotiated and eliminated rather quickly. Dairy is famous for very sporadic uses of non-tariff barriers. What could we do, what could be done at the EAC level to actually fix the process, which clearly is not working, to solve the problem of non-tariff barriers within the East African community? Any ideas?
Thank you. I think I saw World Bank.
No, you saw IMF.
IMF. Yeah, sisters and brothers.
Quick question for Mr. Luanga. 1 year into the implementation of the Paris Development Model, what is the share of households, what is the number of households that have accessed those funds, and what is the uptake of the funds overall, and what can be done to step up access? Thank you.
I'll go behind there, and then we'll see whether we shouldn't take round 1 and then come for second round.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Martin Fowler, USAID. Thank you very much indeed. As Richard just said, this has been a great session. A lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of useful background information on the PDM. The facilitator at the beginning talked about the fact that the key permanent secretaries were here. Unfortunately, I don't think the permanent secretary for the Ministry of Agriculture is here, because I believe this is a key topic for the Ministry of Agriculture to be listening to and be conversing and discussing. And I'd just like to ask Nana and his colleague from DDA about the level of informality. 70%. It seems to be even higher than it used to be. Why is it so high? Victoria has just made a suggestion that that's a lot of the issue to do with taxation, maybe one of the things, but I just wondered why it was so large. And you haven't put any suggestions, I don't think, in your paper as to how it might be reduced, because you say that will be one of the issues by which we are able to reduce the high levels of post-harvest losses by making the production chain more formal. How do you go about doing that? And then finally to Medina, great discussion, and you rightly emphasize the importance of extension, as did Mr. Luanga in his presentation. Unfortunately, it seems the budget doesn't agree with you. This year, the budget to extension, other than staff, has dropped significantly. It's one of the few line items in the agro-industrialization program's budget that has dropped significantly. And sadly, extension has been hit. Thank you.
Thank you, members, because we expected one question from each submission, but we got very many. I think I want to plead. That we must stop here. I will leave my contact so that if there are any more questions, then you are able to continue engaging. But I can see Commissioner General URA is really requesting, and therefore, since he's the chief tax person, I would have every reason to give him a chance maybe to respond to something. Commissioner General.
Moderator, thank you very much for the opportunity. A lot of appreciation to the discussants, the panelists, for the excellent presentations. One comment and one response from me. The comment to the discussants, and I think a number of them talked about one of the challenges that stand in our way being quality, the quality of the products we are putting on the market. And I think that's core. So whereas the PDM may effectively address the issues of production, I think the agencies of government need to focus on regulation and quality. And let's try and interrogate the issues that make some of our products not globally attractive. Yes, the domestic market is great, and the presentation showed that we are growing in that, but the global market is much bigger, and Uganda will benefit a lot if we take our fair share. What could be standing in our way is good quality, and the quality is not only the inputs of seedlings and stuff like that. A lot of it has to do with hygiene, the acaricides we use, the chemicals we use, the post-harvest handling, and all that. So I think it's an area that we need to pay more attention, even in the PDM model and all the relevant government agencies. Now, the other element is formality. And this also, in a way, touches the question of Dr. Victoria, because according to her, URA is one of the disincentive of formalization. And honestly speaking, we have no benefit as URA if we stand in the way of formality. So formality is not equal to taxation. If previously we have been jumping on those formal organizations to tax them, just observe, you'll notice that that's not the way we are going nowadays. Because we have added so many people on our tax register who are not yet contributing anything, because we have a period to give them time to grow. And if you find us not keeping that promise, please hold us responsible. So we will join hands with the private sector to educate our people that formalizing our businesses and getting them registered does not automatically mean paying taxes. Taxes are paid based on profit. Now, the particular reference given of presumptive tax 20%, again, Dr. Victoria, this is not very accurate because, first of all, presumptive tax is paid for those above a threshold. Not everyone pays presumptive tax. Presumptive tax is income tax for small businesses. Now, the beginning point of the small businesses is at least you should be having an income in the year that is above 150. Now, if you're below that, you pay zero presumptive. If you're above that, the first tranche is 80,000 because the assumption is that you don't even have formal books. So if you have no formal books, you just pay 80,000 the whole year. The next tranche after that is 200,000, and the highest is 900,000. So I think the gap that we could be having is the tax education, and I'm going to ensure that this presumptive tax schedule is put on our website so that at your own time you go there and study it. Now, it is not aiming at any agricultural sector, whether beef or dairy or what. It is for anybody who is earning an income that is above that threshold in a year. He should be able to contribute a small amount. It is a beginning tax. I think for the first time this year, we were able to collect about 20 billion from that tax head of presumptive. But as we educate, people will know that still it is not a mob tax and it is not a high percentage in the ranges of 20. With time we can add on, but let me just keep it there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. On quality, I think we hear you, but I want to assure you from the design and conceptual side, our issue of Pillar 1 of production, processing and marketing, of course, covers ingredients of quality and all those issues. Now, members, there's nothing I can do. I think at this time I have to come back to this side. We'll have another meeting because PDM has just started. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So we shall have more debates and dialogue on PDM. Let me now invite, starting with Nana, then Kenneth, and then Dr. Madina to come, and Eli and Gorova, and 1 minute each to respond to issues raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the questions and comments. I think they're very important. To respond to the question asked by Mr. Martin Fowler on why we did not give the reasons for informality, just to say that the time was so limited for this presentation, and we have a dairy policy action plan that Kenneth has mentioned, which has summaries of all the studies and the solutions, including extension, processing, market, and everything. But just to respond directly, the issue of tax is one of the reasons why most of these, farmers and traders do not want to formalize. That has been mentioned by Dr. Victoria. But also the meat collection centers, some farmers think that they do not get immediate cash, which serves as a formal sector. So when they supply milk, they have to get cash after some few days, and that's a problem. So they prefer immediate cash, which is very common in the formal sector. So in terms of solutions, we suggested within that plan to sensitize traders and farmers on the importance of being formalized and the benefits that they are going to have in terms of market access, and also for the government to help subsidize certification of businesses. Then not to maybe take the question of the discussants, but on the question that was asked by Mr. Victor on what the government is doing within the framework of PDM to market the products. Just to say that FAO, as of now, we have a collaboration with the Ministry of Trade to support with evidence to develop a marketing strategy for the parish development model. So this is ongoing, and I believe it's in line with the efforts of the government. Thank you.
Very much, Kenneth. 1 minute.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator. I wanted to just to summarize in response to what the participants have raised, just into one. The issue of formality, quality control, farmer organizations can be best addressed, can speak for the dairy industry, is on a heavy investment on the milk collection centers. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, investments in storage and marketing facility in the dairy industry is a game changer. We are all aware that in the last, I think, 7 to 9 years, the dairy industry in southeastern Uganda nearly burst because of a proliferation of all these milk collection centers. So if we can adopt that approach and invest heavily on milk collection centers across the country, we shall address the issues of formality, we shall address the issue of aggregation, we shall address the issue of quality in the dairy industry. Thank you so much.
Dr. Medina.
Thank you, Chair. Three issues to emphasize is that as Maïf has profiled these markets, they've said they profile the markets where we are going to sell. The issue is how involved are these farmers in knowing these markets? The agreement signed to deliver, because that's very critical. That Maïf not do its job thinking it's going to come down and tell them grow. We've seen this fail. So we need to ensure the farmers on board, knowing where they are selling, and they are part of the game, knowing that they are part of the failure if something fails. That will also issues around quality. Quality will not be an issue at the end of the day. It's being controlled at that level because they know they will fail if this quality of the market is not guaranteed and they've not supplied accordingly. So let it not be a top-bottom, but has to be inclusive in terms of planning for these markets. Issues around quality and regulation are part of planning. We do not, most of the time they are failing on quality because we first produce, then we start praying to God, let it be of quality that it will pass Sudan to take it. Then we start wondering why Sudan has not taken the cassava. We're like, why Sudan? You know, those are the issues. Are they part of the planning? Are they part of that aspect of making sure that whatever they are producing is of that quality of the market? And they see the agreements in place, that there is a part of them. And lastly, as you're organizing profiling households, I'm actually suggesting you profile the groups more, because that's the issue. Are they aggregated enough to produce for these markets? It's not the household. This is the trickle-down effect. It's the groups that you need. Do they have enough land? Do they have enough cohesion? Do they have the thinking that they need to produce for getting out of poverty? So you need to see how best to profile the groups on ground, rather than actually beyond the households. I submit again.
Thank you, Eddie.
Julius, I'm still with you because I'm both sides and I'll have lunch with you to convince you more. Richard, the new farmer, you know, regional integration is always a challenge. When Trump became president, he threatened to pull out of NAFTA, you remember. So even in this region, I see sticker issues. I see a lot of emotion, and I call it emotion. The other day, I saw the former president of Kenya had visited our president, and then I saw the current president of Kenya. I think my plea is that at that level, they should remove the emotion and help us. But also at the EAC, we need to have rules that bind, that stick. We should have rules which show that when you pull out, what are the punishments? What are the penalties? I think we are light on our penalties because we are tired of situations whereby every day a political pronouncement affects our trade when we are members of the EAC or any other broker at that level. And we will keep advising government to do that. Julius, again, the most important thing, but also replying to Richard Newfarmer, is now the need to diversify. They need to diversify out of even our regional market, but which comes with costs. Because the regional market with psychic distance, with the transport costs, logistics approach, physical and real distribution is the best market. But now we have no choice. We have to diversify. We have to go to Nigeria. We have to go to Algeria. We have to go to South Africa. But this comes with the cost of logistics, which makes our products expensive. And again, the government must invest in transport, logistics to access markets. But also we are trying to diversify our products, not only diversify markets, so that we can have many products that can change and have markets in different places. The last one is value addition, and the very last one, as Medina says, we need broad awareness, which is a cost to government. Because how do producers know of the existence of markets? Through the Minister of Finance and members of Parliament, you need to put money in marketing. You are giving money to parish development model, you are not giving money to marketing. So when it comes, Julius will be asking me, where are the markets? Then I will not have markets because you have not funded me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gorova. Strictly 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members, for the issues. One, I think I need to say we take the proposals that are coming out of this forum, and of course they will inform the subsequent processes of government, particularly budgeting and planning. And now specifically on the issue raised by Honorable Sechitoleko around the urban parishes, I think I need to mention that for the urban parishes, like say Nakawa, with the approval, of course, of Cabinet and His Excellency the President, there have been variations in the application of PDM there, particularly with respect to the enterprises that we are looking at. So in the urban settings, you will find acceptable enterprises such as restaurant, small restaurant ownership, briquettes, and the like, in addition to marketing these agricultural products. Because, like I mentioned, the funding is eligible for the entire agricultural value chain. So in the urban setting, the focus is on marketing. On the other enterprises that seem to have been left out, like Jinga and Mira, we have an enterprise that I said is called Food Crops. So in many areas where we have seen value chains that are outside the other 6, we have seen some communities opt or decide to go into those other value chains. And it is allowed as long as it is still within food crops. Then maybe finally, Chair, there is a question from the colleague from IMF about how many households and have access to what. So as at end of last financial year, that is as at end of June 2023, not as of today. This figure may have changed as of today, but as of June 2023, 252,000 households had accessed around 63 billion shillings under this parish revenue fund as at the end of last financial year. Now, the reason for that is the uptake for that level is, as I had mentioned, we have just concluded what we call the establishment phase. And in the establishment phase, we were establishing the entire ecosystem that is channeling this money to the parish and to the household. We were also having the training, so the preparation of the beneficiaries happen in the same period. So Cabinet took a decision that no beneficiary should access this money before they are prepared. So those processes were happening in that period that I called the establishment phase, but that is the level as at of end of last financial year. About the funding for extension, that the Ministry of Finance has concluded a proposal for providing those funds this financial year, and those funds for extension will be provided. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. As my tenure expires, I just want to make 2 statements. One is that indeed analysis was done on enterprises. Actually, we have 32, we have 18, we have 7. But 7 are the most profitable that we are putting in PDM. But analysis has gone on under the code name of Chibaru. The second statement is to congratulate the Minister and the Cabinet and the President, because from the discussions, PDM has been endorsed as, I think, a well thought out program, and therefore I think intellectually we are good to go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for our presenters and participants. Thank you. I hand over back to Maurice.
All right. As usual, we've been taking panel photos. Let me consult Dr. Albert on which month of the calendar of the ministry you will appear. Can we give the panel another round of applause? We want to thank the PS, Minister of Local Government, Ben Kumanya, and his panel. As the PS leaves, since everyone on the panel was a doctor, he's now Dr. Benjamin Kumumanya. Thanks to a very insightful conversation on PDM. The recommendation, I think, from Dr. Albert. Thank you very much, PS and the team. I think from the recommendation from Dr. Albert was very clear that we are moving away from the chapter on lamentations. And as Doctor, you had said, a lot of the conversation today was on the way forward. And I'm excited that the contributions both from the floor, and I'm hopeful the Honorable Victoria is also happy because this time the Commissioner General is here and you got your answers on the presumptive tax. We need to close, and I'm glad the Honorable Minister is here. He's handling the closing session. But as we set up for this closing session, Honorable Minister, I want again to run through the existing protocol. The Honorable Minister for General Duties in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, our Executive Director of the IGC, Dr. Jonathan Lip, the Africa, the heads, of course, of the different agencies, including the Africa Development Bank, the World Bank, the IMF that are represented here. Again, in a very special way, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Uganda, Michael Atengi Ego, the Commissioner General Uganda Revenue Authority, John Musinguzi, and of course, the different heads of the government agencies represented here. And I remember someone asking where are the banks. The CEO of Stanbic Bank is in the room. So we want to thank Anne Juko for joining us this afternoon for the closing session. Can we give a round of applause? Working with the Bank of Uganda, they are also offering the agriculture credit facility. I think that's the only one I'm allowed to promote, and you haven't paid for the others. I can't promote them. I also want, in a very special way, to thank and really appreciate all our panelists and moderators. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? I must begin the end of our forum, and taking us through the closing bits of the forum will be none other than our Minister of State for General Duties in the Ministry of Finance. You will notice we've amended the closing session quite a bit so that we fit within our broadcast time because we are broadcasting this live with our media partners, UBC, NTV, and NBS. And the Honorable Minister will have a guest who will make a keynote presentation, and thereafter the Honorable Minister will make closing remarks. And so we've removed one or two things from that particular session. So can we put our hands together for the Honorable Minister who's coming to wrap up our session?
Since Maurice has already run through the protocol, in the interest of time, let me introduce to you my guest, and I invite him to the podium. My guest to take us through the keynote address on mobilizing political action for second and third generation reforms, lessons from Africa is Dr. Stefan Deacon. He's a professor of economic policy at the Blavatnik School of Government and the Economics Department, a fellow at Jesus College. He's here. He's taking his way to the stage. And is also a director of the Center of Study for African Economies. Between 2011 and 2017, he was chief economist at the Department of International Development, DFID, the government department in charge with the UK aid policy and spending. In this position, he provided strategic advice and was responsible for ensuring the use of evidence in decision-making. Before joining the University of Oxford, he held positions at the University of Addis Ababa, a Catholic University of Lavin, and wider part of the United Nations University. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Professor Stephan to give us a keynote address. Thank you. Professor Stephan, you're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm waiting for the slides to be put up, but let me first say a few things. And the title raises expectations. And I want to first say, some of you will be disappointed. You don't get an outsider to tell you exactly and very concretely what you have to do. That's not the way I want to think about it. Some will not like what I'm going to say. They may not agree, but I can actually say, before I say anything else, that very respectfully, I'm very conscious how much the country has achieved since 1986. I'm very, very conscious about it. And I'm also very conscious that, having been working inside the government department in the UK, managing economic policy and economic management is really hard. Okay, that's hard work every day. So it's very easy for an outsider to say, oh, this is all the things you should have done. I also may, and I will try not to sound negative and pessimistic. It's going to be tough because there is a difficult period that has happened, but I really think, and I take it in that spirit, I think that the best days of Uganda's economies are ahead of it. And so it's in that spirit I just want to talk, and I would like to get my slides projected now. So I'm going to try to make 3 points, and the 3 points are, it's very hard not to agree with me that in the last 30 years we have a period of about 20 years where growth was actually really substantial. But we have a sense that after the last 15, 20 years of progress, there's been a kind of a period of the last 10, maybe years or something, that actually the progress seems to have slowed down a lot. And I want to ask the question why that is. And I'm going to do this not by, in detail, analyze every detail of the Ugandan economy or the economic policy or other things, although I will talk about it, but I also want to talk about it by referring to other countries that could give us ideas of why this may have happened here as well. And I want to mainly talk about how can we begin to reverse this by learning from other African countries, from other Asian countries, rather than very specific choices I'll talk about. It's all to do with how we go about this. And I think actually it's related to things like tax and oil and the way the state engages with business and politics and how it all interacts. I think it's going to be key of it. Okay, let me get you a couple of the facts and try to run through quickly. I think they're quite well known by now. So, since 1991, in fact, we can go back to 87, but let me take, because that's where the data are nicely also presented on the graphs, between somehow 1991 and 2011, maybe 2010 or something of that period, the Ugandan economy was really outperforming all its neighbors. We're talking about 3.8, 3.9% per capita growth per year. I do it per capita, and I was very glad earlier, yesterday, the IMF representative said, look, that's the one we need to look at. Because, population growth is different in different places. And well, when we look at it, despite high fertility and high population growth, this was really quite remarkably good performance for about 20 years. But actually since then, it does look as if the economy has run out of steam. About 1.2% per capita growth. And then other countries have now in the neighborhood are actually doing considerably better. We also know, and it's been alluded to as well, this remarkable and really impressive progress in human development and extreme poverty in Uganda, that progress that was actually related also to this period of recovery and growth between, say, 91 and about 2010, that progress is actually beginning to be reversed. And that's actually a really bad sign. You know, the growth is not delivering the poverty reduction, and I think there's a lot to do with the fact that the growth is so low. And I know there's all kinds of initiatives for it, but we just have to admit it. It's a running out of steam of a lot of the earlier success. So how can we begin to think about, you know, getting lessons about from other places about, you know, can we actually conceptualize and get a bit of a sense of, you know, what Uganda's evolution in this last 30 years has in common in the earlier period or in the later period with other countries, and can we actually begin to actually learn a little bit about it? And, you know, there is a habit, actually let me go back for a moment, there's a habit to actually say, let's look at the tigers, you know. I mean, there's countries in the region that would love to be Singapore. You know, Singapore is tough, you know, this is not so self-evident, okay? Taiwan, I don't think you have to learn that much from Singapore and Taiwan. You know, it's great, but I don't think many countries can do that. And I'll come back to that. So it's not also Korea, Japan, these were different times. The kind of tiger economies, let's calm down a little bit, okay? Let's calm down. But actually, there are countries in the same period where actually, in some sense, Uganda wasn't really being totally outperformed by them, although in more recent periods, it is being outperformed with them. And that's actually a bit more helpful. And, you know, you get economies like Indonesia, and, you know, I have this table here, and it's quite helpful to actually say, well, where were they? Where I'm more or less starting, around 1990. Of course, Indonesia was well past it. It was actually where Uganda was in 1990, it was probably already before independence in the 1960s. Ghana, similarly. But there are places like China, Bangladesh, and India, or Nepal, that weren't that far away, not so long ago, in this kind of position. So these are interesting countries. And not just China. I will actually talk quite a bit about Bangladesh, which I bet most of you don't know much about. And it's far more to learn from Bangladesh than you can ever learn from Singapore or Taiwan or Korea. And so you look at these, and these countries, you see these very fast growth rates. They did really well. Nepal, I put it there because this is a period, 2006, is when it came out of conflict. And it had remarkably about 15 years similar growth rates that you had per capita coming out of conflict. Nepal is actually a one to watch, landlocked country. Where will it go next? You can learn quite a bit from what Nepal is doing right or wrong over time. Ethiopia in the neighborhood as well, you know, it was only in 2007 as rich as Uganda was in 1990. But of course it was a really fast grower there. I could have put Rwanda there as well, and we could put there. But the different phases that Uganda has experienced, it's actually helpful to say, okay, what does it have in common in this early period with some of these fast accelerations that we saw in some of the other places and whatnot? Okay, this is case study based, this is interpretation, this is, you know, there is evidence about each of these countries. I try to comparatively put these together. And quite helpfully, I want to first of all quickly say what will not explain the success of countries like Indonesia or China or India or Bangladesh in a comparative way. What doesn't explain success is things that you often hear, and there's lots of strong advocates for one or the other. So what doesn't explain is basically a dramatic or passionate choice between we have to go for state-led development or market-based development. Actually, some of these did actually much more state-led, like China. Ethiopia tried to do as well in this period of 2005 to 2020. But of course, China did it also pre-1979 and with a lot of failure. Markets-led, actually Bangladesh, Indonesia, Ghana, it's been much more markets-led development that they did. So it's too simple to reduce it. I'm not saying that markets don't matter or the state doesn't matter. That's the last thing I will say. But actually, it's helpful to really think about what choices did they make in this space relative to their own context. And that will be an important point I want to make. And the second one is, you know, we can keep on trying, and sometimes people try to do this with cross-country regressions and all kinds of things to get a very singular blueprint for success and failure. Actually, the more you look at it, and in fact, it became quite obvious already 10, 15 years ago when the World Bank did a big study by the Growth Commission, that actually it turned out to be pretty difficult to actually say growth successes. In their case, it was 30 years of very fast growth. They did this. Actually, countries do quite a lot of things. I'm not quite to say that economics has nothing to say what probably is better than otherwise. But I'm actually going to say is that actually countries, within all kind of imperfections and local context, have a bit of choice. They can do certain things, and they don't have to do exactly the same. It's within a certain constraint, because one thing you can definitely say, you can screw it up. Okay, forgive my language. You can make an absolute mess of it. And my friends in Nigeria will know very well that 7 exchange rate, a macroeconomic policy based on 7 exchange rates, is not very helpful and conducive for a business environment, as the former governor never wanted to admit, but actually really was a problem in Nigeria. So there is a limit to what you can do. And so anything goes, anything you dream up in a room like this or in an office somewhere, many things will go wrong. But there is a broader set of things you can do, and you can make some choices. You know, for example, even the celebrated idea of industrial policies, if you start looking between different countries, some were betting more on industrial parks, others were doing it on nationwide industrial policies, others were entirely based on investment regimes, and so on. And all of them, some of them were successful, and I can assure you, some of them who did exactly the same, seemingly did exactly the same, were failures. So it's not simply about what you set out to do, and then you will have success. Minimal amount of trade matters, outward orientation is a pretty good bet. Stable macroeconomy is a pretty good bet. And there's a couple more that you could say. Of course, you have to do something in infrastructure. You have to do something on health and education. But interestingly, you don't have to do it in exact proportions as if someone has said, you know, you need to have that percentage on agriculture and that percentage on that. All these countries, they did a little bit. They found their mix. And I'll tell you what that mix has behind it in some sense. That could hopefully be helpful here as well. And then finally, one thing that should give you hope, these countries were not perfect. These countries, as, let me gently call it, a lot of facilitation in their economy, in their state. Or, as I not so gently say, there's a lot of corruption there as well. You know, China has a lot of corruption. Indonesia had a lot of corruption as well, or still has. Bangladesh as well. Somehow or another, they managed, within that whole imperfection of the way the state operated with business and within itself, they found a way to actually get to do it. So I'm not going to say, I'm not one of these greasing of the wheels kind of people. You need corruption, otherwise the economy can't work. That's not what I'm going to say. There's a cost to it. But there is something there that you don't have to wait, that you don't have to start by reading Acemoglu and Robinson, Why Nations Fail, get your institutions right to the level of where the UK was in the 19th century, and then you can start growing. No, these countries managed to do that within their imperfection. And that's important. You can do it within your imperfections, but you have to then be very smart, and that smartness I'll come to in a moment. So it's helpful to, for a moment, and I'm sorry, I'm an academic, so I'll go first principles, I go a bit back. It's helpful to actually think about, because a lot of what I'm going to say is about the idea of the state and the way it functions within a society, and the way it links with the economy and the way it links with politics. And it's always helpful to go to probably one of the, brightest people that were around in economic history, Douglas North. He got a Nobel Prize. His last book, together with Wallace and Weingast, actually the first paragraph is a really nice definition of, how to think of a state. Historically, but actually all the time. Think of the state as a solution in the first instance to the problem of violence, Roving bandits going around, no, you bring up a structure. Conflict, you bring a structure. The state typically emerges at some point as a way of stabilizing and finding a way of stabilizing society, often after conflictual periods. There I say 1986. And so you get something there. But the emergence of a state typically involves a group of people that have enough power and influence. A dominant coalition of them manages to impose, initially, that kind of stability. Okay? Sounds familiar, maybe. But what you do at the same time, it's not just a political thing or a military thing. You typically also get, actually, a structure of organization controlled by that dominant coalition of how we're going to run access to resources and run access to activities. Or put it simply, how we're going to run the state, who gets what within the state, and how we're going to run the economy who gets access to licenses, to activities, to things. It's a helpful thing. So forgive me, it's abstract. Hopefully you're still with me. So the way to think about the state, often when it emerges and then evolves, is somehow a group of people, dominant because of maybe military might or other might, and they actually make a deal amongst each other around how the state was going to be organized and run, how the economy is going to be organized and run. And I call this actually, even if I look anywhere in the world, whether I go to the US today or the UK today, I used to work in the front office of a minister in the UK, a foreign secretary. We have something not that dissimilar to most other countries in the world. Ultimately, maybe everybody's equal, a few are more equal than the others. There is a form of an elite, somehow with more influence and powers. It's in politics, in business, in the military, civil servants and so on. Can actually tell you, in my definition of the elite, quite a few of you are part of it, okay? This is not somehow only one person there or a traditional leader somewhere. I'm thinking here of people with some power and influence, and there's many of you here. There's nothing pejorative about my term here. This is simply the people that actually somehow are responsible to organize society and actually have a role or an influence in it. And as a minimum, this is a coalition of peace and stability. But then the important bit, the way you then go about from it further, this is not just politics. This is about politics and economics and the way you actually organize all these things. And there are choices to be made by the dominant coalition. There are choices to be made by the elite that actually have power and influence. Okay? And there's lots of choices. And we could make choices about how to organize the state, as for example, President Mobutu seems to have done in the 1970s and 1980s in Congo, in the Zaire. You could have a kleptocratic state, and if you are powerful in that state, you have a license to steal. And forgive me, and it's very hard not to think of the Zaire of that period as actually a group of people had a license to steal the natural resources and from all the businesses, from the people as well. It ended not very well, as we all know. You could have the opposite, sometimes the one we may dream of sitting in a room like this idealized meritocratic state, technocratic state. Sometimes people like to think Singapore is like that. I think it's a bit more subtle, but it has definitely a strong technocratic thing, and people are in the state entirely on merit. Very few states can afford that. I'll come back to a little bit that actually may still to some extent be possible in many places. A lot of states have something, and I did a little typo, but it doesn't really matter. They have a clientelist type of organization. What do we mean by this? That the state and those who get powerful position in the state is to some extent a reward for loyalty and a reward for loyalty in terms of jobs and contracts. I'll be honest, and I know there's representatives from the UK here as well. I think the UK has elements of that. US has elements of that. Think of party finance in the US, lobbying in the US. This is not about me so much saying there's a bad bunch and there's a good bunch. Most democracies has elements of that. Because you need to somehow reward your groups for their support. Of course, there's a matter of degree. Sometimes it gets a bit more and a bit less. Most states are versions, maybe hybrids of all some of these things. And his ideas and ideology and religion, all these things will feature in it. But it's quite helpful to think that states can have more of these tendencies or less. I fear you know where I'm going. But it's an important thing to think, how do we now look at these very diverse places like India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, some of the tiger economies, China, how do we think what they seem to have in common? And what is really striking, the more you do and you read the political analysis and you think through the economic actions that were taken, somehow enough, within that dominant coalition, that elite bargain, they're actually really committed to deliver on growth and development. There was a real strong common shared responsibility, not just by the commander-in-chief, not just in Singapore by Lee Kuan Yew, but actually by different people actually saying, no, we want this to deliver this. We want this to work. We want to get there. Okay? And basically, it's a broad shared coalition with those people who have power and influence in that system. Now, you could have lots of other incentives. You could have kleptocratic or individually kleptocratic instincts, and that's not the same. So you actually talk about some kind of broad thing. So why do countries get us? And I'll give you in a moment some examples. So when you start looking at these examples, and you can go through loads of different ones, and in a book I recently wrote, I go through about 30 of these different countries. Sometimes it involves because there is a real national commitment. Actually, usually it's not enough. It's a good thing. By the way, it's a good thing. And committed politicians, of course, we want to have them. There's often also, somehow with people in powerful positions, that are actually really keen on legitimacy and legacy. And I welcome this. You go to places and say, look, we are in a powerful position. Our legitimacy requires that we actually try to spread this wealth, to get the economy to grow, and so on. And I'll give you an examples in a moment. Often it follows out of chaos or conflict, because often legitimacy of leading groups is limited. And often leadership is not about simply being the commander-in-chief, not even just the communicator-in-chief, but often it's the broker-in-chief of the coalition, and keep it together. So it's this brokering thing that you can see this. Now, why? And you would say, but every country in the world, every African country, even Mobutu was saying we're going to do growth and development. It's all the words. Now, there's two things there, and I'll say in a moment a bit more about that. It can't be just words, but also you can't take it for granted that the elite wants to do this. And why is this? Because change risks the powerful in their position. Okay? There's a great paper about the emergence of democracy in England. I only have to give you the title, and it probably sums it up. It's called Democracy by Mistake. And basically it is leading groups that thought, if we give a bit more, we can keep our powerful position. And we keep on giving a bit more, and suddenly it's a full democracy. And groups are losing power, aristocrats are losing power. So you don't underestimate how growth and development is disruptive for the status quo. It probably explains why countries with natural resources often have a trouble to get a growth commitment going, because the status quo doesn't need any productive activities. I'm afraid that's my analysis for Nigeria. If you have no incentive, the status quo is great because I control whatever the natural resource wealth is, or Congo as well. If I control that, why should I try to grow? Because I may lose position, I get educated people, I get new wealthy elites, I get new businesses and so on. So there's a real issue there. Anyway, so it's not for granted. Let me quickly give you now the examples there, and hopefully we'll get a couple of ideas here for Uganda, and I'll turn to Uganda. So it's really interesting, if you start looking in a comparative politics, political economy type of analysis, what happened in different of these countries. And in fact, these dating of their growth acceleration tend to come together with moments in their history when there is actually a realization we probably need to do something amongst the elite to actually keep on going. The Chinese Communist Party, definitely 1979 was in big crisis. And actually very explicitly, Deng Xiaoping basically said, look, we need to do something different here. And in fact, there's speeches where you get that, because we need to have legitimacy to our population. And think of it, for a communist party in the world, there's no afterlife of value. You better deliver something today. That's your legitimacy. And so actually, this is very much striking there. If you talk to Chinese officials of that time, that's what they actually said, look, we need to do this differently. We can't just do ideology, but we need to do pragmatic, and everything needs to be focused on growth and food security. And so very pragmatically, they moved to it. Actually, Meles Zenawi in Ethiopia in 2005, I could give you, well enough the history, didn't quite win the elections in 2005, needed legitimacy. And actually bet on legitimacy through development to overcome the fundamental ethnic strife in the country. Did it succeed? I don't think so, but we had 15 years where an amazing attempt was made to do to growth and development to actually achieve that. That was the elite commitment of the people then who had power. Bangladesh is interesting because they did it at the end. After the 1970s, they had become independent. After the independence war, a massive famine, probably the largest, most recent man-made famine that the world has known. man-made, a nature-made famine that the world had known, and then political violence there and so on. And then you get in the 1980s, somehow or another, a realignment of different interests. And while political fighting continued, everybody was quite in agreement. It's really important to get the economy going. So they made the central bank, in a country where they had a lot of state-led development, they actually said, no, we're going to go to first principles. We strengthen the central bank, we go to some liberalization, and if we do industrial policies, we do a limited amount for it, but we're actually going to try to do this different. And in fact, we went even further. We wanted to deliver for the people in health and education. The state was actually very weak. They're actually quite happy that something like 70% of the community health workers came from NGOs. And basically they delivered health through local NGOs. BRAC is the largest NGO in the world, was actually emerging like that. They made these choices because they were really committed to it. So anyway, chaos, legitimacy, and so on, often there. I think, if we go back in time, this is why I rank you in this category after 1986. I think there was a very clear, deep commitment to deliver a peace dividend and to actually make progress. There was a very clear sense that actually development mattered. Okay? Now, that's maybe then the first point, is definitely was there very, very strong. And I think that's part of the recipe of the success you had then. But it's not enough, it's words. You know, we can all say we want development. You know, every election, everybody says they want development. So it has to be more than words. And of course, here in the country, we also had a real commitment to keep that peace and stability, also in the economy, trying to very hard. But also you got an emergence, in general, in the countries where this happens, people think carefully about what the state can do and what it can't do. I call this a self-aware state. So basically being conscious about what can I do, what I can't do. Just knowing what your state is, what its capabilities are, not taking on too little, not taking on too much. Okay, let me explain that with some differences. So on the left-hand side, you see the Korean flag and the Chinese flag. You know, tigers and tiger cubs, you know, dragon, whatever you call these countries. On the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is Indonesia and Bangladesh. It's actually really helpful to try to think a bit about what they had as a state and how they acted. So the left-hand side, and I heard today the term development state emerging, they were the true development state. You know, the state took actually an important role in all kinds of ways, doing extensive industrial policies, extensive role of the state trying to do it. Of course, China probably even more than Korea, but the state was really important. You know, and Hadu Chang and people like that write about that and get a lot of appeal and say, look, and someone like him would say, and everybody should do this. You know, we should learn from Korea. The state took the lead and we should do all the industrial policies and all doing it. Okay, well, let me counter this with at least a few points. We are talking here about two countries that had centralized taxation for 2,000 years. We talked about the importance of taxing yesterday and how important it is for state building. If you do that for 2,000 years with centralized taxation, that works quite well. Good start. You had for 2,000 years, a bit less than that, but still, maybe 1,500 years, civil servants at the top were selected through a state exam, meritocratically, for 1,500 years. A meritocratic state exam. You know, let me actually put it very simply. If I'm ever going to try out state-led development, I would have picked China. I would have picked China because you at least had historical conditions that when you decided to do it, you had them. Now, this is not the Bangladeshi state or the Indonesian state. Bangladesh, I was alluding to it, had come out of conflict. The whole state apparatus had to be changed after 1970. They appointed a lot of people as a reward for their role in the independence struggle. Not necessarily because they were the best bureaucrats, but a lot of people were there. Actually, you really built up, and they admit to that, what I call this clientelist state. A lot of people were rewarded for loyalty because they actually were part of the independence struggle and they were going to run this. Now, what's the amazing thing about Bangladesh? That by the 1980s they realized that that's not the way to do it. that actually that is not the way to do it, and they corrected themselves. They tried state-led development in the 1970s. They had lots of political violence also on the back of it. And actually in the 1980s, they actually decided, no, look, the state should play a role. But they decided to selectively liberalize, and in a minor few places, they did some industrial policy. And this was basically some sensible things to help build up the garment industry, not that much. And then for the most of the other things in agriculture, the government is still proud. It's the fact that we liberalized the input markets, got us the massive supply response, and actually the Green Revolution started embedding themselves in Bangladesh. I'm not saying that I go now everywhere in the world saying this is what you need to do, but they found some things that mattered for them at that moment. And it's really interesting. They had a weak state, and they recognized we can't do state-led development. We have to be really careful here, because otherwise this goes wrong. Indonesia, very similar stories in the 1970s, 1980s. Okay? So anyone who tells you need to be a developmental state, ask yourself, well, what kind of, because we need to think about our own state capabilities. And over-optimism never has a high economic rate of return. Okay? So you just want to be a bit careful. Okay? And this is what I think. In early 1990s, this country recognized that actually the state wasn't that strong. And you could say from an ideological point of view, oh, well, we liberalized because Washington Consensus was a great thing and we liberalized, that's the thing to do it. Yeah, maybe, maybe not, and we could have a long argument over it, and I'm happy to be part of that argument. But at the same time, if you had to pick something at the time, it's probably sensible that they didn't try to do China from the 1970s. But actually, you actually went for the liberalization that you did, because the state is weak, and you did remarkably similar things than Bangladesh. Remarkably similar things. Not too much. A strong central bank, exactly like in Bangladesh. A strong Ministry of Finance, exactly like in Bangladesh. Did I actually tell you Bangladesh has been growing now in the last 25 years, 6-7% per year, and has managed to get all the main halving extreme poverty and so on. So it has delivered it in its own model. Okay. And there's a final point I want to add to it. This is hard work. I start with saying, economic management is hard. And the real lesson that I learned from sitting inside government working on anything is that you have to be willing, once in a while saying, by the way, this doesn't quite work. And you have to be willing to go to your politicians and say, you know what, that thing that we thought was really going to be great, maybe not, okay? You need to be willing, both in your bureaucracy and your politics, to be willing to correct your errors. You have to learn, and I think that has a lot to do with accountability. You could have it externally from political processes, you could have it internally. And I'm a big believer that the internal accountability processes can work, can be much stronger. And it's not just by the state, but it's actually by different players in it. Lobbyists in the room, please be aware too. And so if you think of it, give you some examples how actually countries build that accountability. So you could do it externally, agencies of restraint, and we have one of them sitting here actually, your IMF rep is sitting here. The one thing I've learned by studying Bangladesh and Indonesia is that, my God, were they smart how they used the IMF. They were so smart. Whenever it was really hard, they would have the conversation and say, okay, how can we do this now? And if necessary, the IMF, they don't like this to be said in public, they happily took the blame. And they actually say, look, blame us if you need to. Actually, it can work, okay? But also being preemptive. Bangladesh, I think it's just amazing. I was in Sri Lanka now during the recent crisis, but actually we had just heard that Bangladesh had done, I don't know what the title was a wonderfully titled something like pre-crisis loan from the IMF. They basically had essentially, and people said to me, but they're going to do just what the government wants to do anyway. I say, yeah, but that's being smart. They actually went to the IMF before the crisis hit. They got the finance. They could do the difficult things. They could do them early. They could do the reforms. And it's so smart. And I just think the Ministry of Finance there is so smart. Actually, by the way, I think the Ministry of Finance here has been like this as well. You are like Bangladesh. You've done things like Bangladesh historically. You've played it smartly. You know the people involved. The former governor definitely as a big champion of this. So smart. That's how you do it. That's how you play this. If it's hard, you use them, of course. At the same time, I will say, and that's the harder one, you have to own it yourself. Over time, you have to more and more be willing to own this yourself. And that's the internal accountability. You know, while Indonesia, Bangladesh often had to rely on the outsiders to be the policewoman or policeman, other countries built up their internal accountability themselves. So you get, for example, China. In the end, you know, my Chinese friends, when they tell me off when I talk about the economic reforms of 1979, they said we didn't do any economic reforms. We did governance reforms. We made people responsible to deliver in whatever way they needed to deliver on progress in development. So if they took the household responsibility model, that's fine. If they took something there, it was a governance reform. They made, within the party and within the civil service, people responsible for delivering on the targets. And quite punitively, so they were a bit scared. And I'm not particularly keen on that model, although one of your neighbors tends to do this a bit as well. But you can learn from China or from Rwanda. Internal accountability can work, and you need to find a way that it works within your own systems. So you can use the external accountability, you've done it well. The internal accountability, maybe you didn't do that much. By the way, Ghana used to be a very good pupil of Bangladesh and Indonesia as well on the external one, a bit weaker on the internal one, and that's what it showed recently. So, let me now entirely, for the rest, briefly talk about Uganda. And I hope you don't think I'm being disrespectful, because I'm an amazing fan of what was achieved here. And in this early period, you had a model that, okay, with weaknesses, and all countries are difficult and so on. I come from the UK. We have to be self-conscious enough that economic models and choices you make about the economy are not always the most wise one. But you had in that period, 91, 2011, definitely still a very powerful elite commitment amongst the politics, amongst the military, amongst the economic elite. You had a self-aware state, and self-aware enough that you didn't try to do too much, that you were actually cautious and you didn't try to do too much. But the pockets of excellence and the individuals involved were really crucial there. And you had some internal accountability. Your Ministry of Finance used to be listened to. I hope it's still the case. You smartly used the external accountability. I think, and this is where you may begin to disagree, I do fear that over the decades, with the economy being more complex, with the state becoming more complex, with politics becoming more complex, this kind of united vision that actually we need to really develop this country has somehow drifted. Maybe not at the very top, I will definitely not suggest that, but definitely at various places. Okay? Politics is quite expensive, forgive me to call that, say it like that. But, you know, there is an issue there that kind of shared vision, it's much more lots of things and lots of people and lots of things that need to happen. There's definitely a problem of less coherence in that underlying vision. Everything is a priority. Doesn't really help to get strong elite commitment. So the self-awareness is definitely gone down. It's definitely over-optimism in terms of what can be delivered. Some great ideas on the table. I do worry when within the systems you have, you can deliver these. And are you really conscious of this? You can't say the state should do this. No, you have to ask yourself, can the state do this with the state we have at the moment? So you want to, and one of the things that I think is a real missed opportunity is that some of these pockets of excellence in the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank, they didn't quite spread. They didn't really spread in the same way across. People will disagree, and that's fine. But I don't think it's in the same sense that we have the pockets. There are some, by the way, and I will not name it at the risk of not naming others. And I think the problem becomes now, within that state, is that, and that's actually the kind of big lesson from other countries. So if you take on things, like Bangladesh state takes on things, well, you have to be really do this with a very clear sense of accountability around delivery and implementation. and I will repeat it later on again, I don't think this is a problem that this country has bad policies, that it has bad laws for the economy. I think this is largely about implementation. This is a problem of the country. It's implementation and delivery on the promises made, on the directives that have been said that we're going to do, and actually it can't be delivered. And that's the thing. Probably it's too much of that, but then we need delivery and implementation systems. So the consequences are, put it down together, lots of potential, but a problem of maybe a failing elite commitment among some key, definitely not all, some key stakeholders in state and society and in business. An over-optimism about state-led development. If you have a state bit more like the Bangladeshi state with limited state capability, don't try to do it all. You are not Korea and Singapore. By the way, Britain doesn't, I worked in the civil service, we are not Singapore, I can assure you. We have not a state like that. And we have to be willing to be self-aware and I'm thinking what you can do within that state. And then accountability systems, internal accountability systems, carefully thinking about, are we actually holding people to account in delivery and implementation? So, future is going to be bright, I can promise you. It's really there. But there are 4 areas where and those people who keep on asking, we need to be more concrete. Okay, this is as concrete as I will be as an outsider, okay? 4 areas. I think the first one is going to be, oil is going to be the biggest signal that you can give for actually being serious about growth and development in this country. The way oil is going to be handled is going to be the prime example that if I write a book in 15 years, I'll say Uganda is back to its success story or not. I think that's going to be the case study. Why do I say this? There's some good signs there, by the way. It's gone slow, okay. And people sometimes say, oh, the net present value of slowness is negative, you know, you lose money. Actually, I never minded that it went slow in this country. Some of the best bureaucrats have been put on it, some of the best administrators. There's been careful thought about it, and actually there is a sense, comparatively, maybe even compared to some other countries in the neighborhood, you've come somehow some good people there, and there's a bit of a build-up of institutions. The problem is essentially the massive expectations that it raises. Can I tell you the simple truth? You don't have much oil. That's not much money if you were to divide it amongst everybody. That's about $20 to $40 per person in the country per year. That's not going to make the population rich. That's only about 1/5 to 1/10 of what Nigeria has per year. Actually, you're lucky that that's that. It's not that much, as long as you can manage expectations of the political class, of your different ministries, of what you're going to do with it. It's how you're going to handle that will be the biggest lesson. And don't think of it, you know, we know that the date is ominous, that it's around 25, 26. I worry about that. Okay, I don't have to say more. Ghana, before a series of elections, spent all its natural resource revenue beforehand and got itself now, through to massive expectations, into debt. They spent their oil before they had it, and that's one of the causes of its crisis now. One of them, not all. That's oil. Manage it well, manage expectations, communicate, and don't make it a scramble for resources. Tax. Lots of things were said about tax, and I'm going to be, you know, a lot of really good things about it. But one thing that I was interesting, and I find interesting in the discussions here, I apologize for picking on the IMF for a second, but I've seen from the IMF often, you know, the ratio is the most important, sometimes seems to be the most important, the tax over GDP. Sometimes. These are macro people, you know, I'm not a macroeconomist. You need to think very carefully how that tax is distributed amongst things, so you don't try to only pick the low-hanging fruits, because they're not necessarily the best fruits to pick. And so you want to think a bit about that, but also, if I think of tax, I always think immediately about the fiscal contract. The fiscal contract is what we actually mean about, is that you raise the taxes, but it's so crucial to be clear about what you do with it. So boosting the tax over GDP ratio without really communicating, well, we're going to really make effort to spend this money really well, and showing the results of spending it really well, That's the only way to get a fiscal contract in a country. In fact, whether it's about tax spending or tax collection, politics and technical analysis, always both of them come into it. You know, there is no country where there is not a whiff of exemptions being given for political reasons. They're not just based on technical analysis. Of course, fiscal expenditures in every country political. That's the instrument of the government in its relationship with the citizens. So it's not just technical, but also political. The problem is when one dominates the other too much. And that's the one you want to be careful on. In tax, it would be exemptions. We talked a lot about it. Fairness is an important thing about tax collection and a clear sense. On spending, it's that similar thing. Is it about political opportunism versus real, proper cost-benefit analysis-based spending? I'm not going to say much more because in every country this is a real issue. But talk about spending and raising revenue at the same time and actually build that fiscal contract with your business community, with your society, is probably key. Tinubu, actually the president of Nigeria now, this is the one thing that actually the business community, and probably got quite a lot of support for him in the country, when he was governor of Lagos. He raised the tax revenue dramatically, but he did it with a clear accountability framework of public services that was being provided to the city of Lagos. And he was very famous for that. And actually, there's an interesting thing. He got it. He was smart in doing that. So, the two last bits. We hear a lot about ideas for growth. There's some excellent things here. We had some, I'm going to name a few. I hope you look at the 10 points that Bernard Hoekman was mentioning about. There's some great things sent on the tax side as well, and what seems to work, not to work, how to think about it, the exemptions and so on. So there's some great stuff here, and hopefully the accountability framework for the event notes them down and looks at it. I do think, and in fact it was mentioned today, like people like Ricardo Hausmann, in Harvard, they would say, look at your capabilities. You've done actually quite well. I remember traveling in Lira various times and just being so impressed by the emergence of food processing industries in that area. There's a success story to be told about raising industrial capabilities here as well. So it's good. Those prospects are there. But the problem I have is that I somehow felt like, and sometimes when I read the things one wants to do, I feel very old, and I feel I'm back in the 1960s and 1970s. So please learn the lessons. Please learn the lessons, and I'm not going to name the programs, but there's several of the very big ones. Let's learn the lessons when other countries have done something very similar. What went right, what went wrong? Okay? So please do that. Because I don't want to go back to the 1970s. I was wearing flares and things like that, so I don't want to go back there. So you want to just really consciously think about that the global economy has changed. You can't do a Korea of 1960. Yeah. You can't do these kind of things. So think enough about the environment, what you have. Think about when new investment comes. It's great to do public infrastructure things. The rate of return to public sector investment is private sector, is measured by the rate of private sector investment in GDP. Make sure you get that. Do it, and don't overdo in terms of the state you have. And then finally, go back to this delivery, implementation, internal accountability. Okay, be self-aware. Find ways. Do less, do it better. Focus on it. Get it really delivered. It's not about policy often here, not about the laws, it's about implementation and delivery. I think if I talk about second generation of reforms, it's actually not just policy, but actually reforms that helps you with your delivery and implementation and building up the frameworks. Do less better. That's the lesson that you get from countries with really similar state capabilities. So learn the lessons. You could learn from Ethiopia and Africa for the strong political commitment they had in 2005. It's a good one to learn from Meles Zenawi and his team. You could learn from Bangladesh, of a state that is self-aware in what it does. And maybe you want to learn a little bit, don't learn everything from Rwanda, but learn a little bit from Rwanda on internal accountability, implementation and delivery, okay? And that's where we'll end. There's lessons to be learned, But actually, the biggest lessons you want to learn is from yourself. Go back to what you did in these first 20 years and some of the essential things that you got right. And I think you will get very far if you rethink what did we get right, and I hope I've helped you a little bit in that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let's give him another round of applause. Yeah, indeed, we have to learn from lessons, learn from our experiences, look into what we can do better, but I can sum it up that our future as Uganda is very, very, very bright under the able leadership of the NRM government. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the close of our 2 days engagement, and I want to end it as follows. Let me first of all begin by recognizing a few big people who are here. The permanent secretaries, I can see my friend Benjamin Kumumanya from local government. I can see my friend, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Uganda, Dr. Michael Ating Ego. I can see Mr. John Musinguzi, Mr. John Musinguzi is the Commissioner General of the Uganda Revenue Authority and is also my very, very, very good friend. We work closely together. We have our team led by Kagwa from Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and of course Dr. Albert Musisi, who has been central in this process. Let's give him a round of applause. We have our various development partners from IMF, World Bank, United Nations, and several others, and also have Mr. Philip Smith, the Development Director of the British High Commission. You can stand up for recognition. Welcome. Of course, I have to recognize the people whom we have partnered with, the Economic Growth Forum Secretariat, and several people who are here. We have civil society, of course, Julius Mukunda and the group. We have the academia, we have distinguished participants from various sectors, ladies and gentlemen. At the conclusion of this vibrant 7th High-Level Economic Growth Forum, under the theme Strengthening Uganda's Competitiveness to Foster Accelerated Economic Growth, has been really enlightening. Gathering stakeholders who share common vision, exhibit a passion for collaborative work, and embrace new ideas is a testament to our collective pursuit of progress. Over the course of these 2 days, the wealth of shared knowledge and the robust dialogues point towards a common goal to grow the economy tenfold, as recently guided by His Excellency, the President. Together we have explored avenues that hold the potential to propel our nation towards newfound levels of prosperity. Let me start by thanking you all for accepting our invitation to this forum and for your active participation, both in person and those of you who are getting us virtually. In a special way, allow me to thank and congratulate the organizers, the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, in partnership with the International Growth Centre and the UK Aid, upon a successful organization and conclusion of this very, very, very important gathering. Thank you so much, especially the International Growth Centre. We really appreciate your partnership. To the presenters, discussants, and moderators, I thank you for making the forum lively and fruitful. I think no one has thanked Maurice. I want to really thank you for making this lively, and also the people who are covering, our partners who are covering UBC, NBS, and NTV, and all our other social media platforms. I really thank you so much. This conversation that we have engaged in is meant to bring together experts from various fields to facilitate knowledge sharing and debate on how to best secure a sustainable future for an average Ugandan. I'm happy to report that this growth forum has just accomplished that. This forum is for further testament to the NRM government's openness and accountability to the people of Uganda in the conduct of the government business. Yesterday, there is someone who asked us that how often do we do these engagements and how do we ensure that all the stakeholders are involved? And I'm sure this statement answers your concern. Plus, of course, many more other engagements we do as Ministry of Finance and also the NRM government. The NRM government is committed to open discussions regarding planning and budgeting with the people, and given that resources are allocated to areas which support our growth and development strategy, it is appropriate that policies that promote inclusive recovery and growth are discussed in such a forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we gathered here yesterday and today to discuss important topic on strengthening Uganda's competitiveness to foster accelerated economic growth. Throughout this forum, our focus has been drawn to a series of critical topics that hold the power to reshape our economic outlook, especially in the face of challenges like the COVID-19 and climate change. We have explored global economic trends, strategies to boost domestic revenue, ways to strengthen exports and business productivity, and the complex interplay between climate change and economic growth. In addition, we have had vital discussions about the game-changing impact of technology and the parish development model. These discussions not only show how intentional we are about tackling these problems, but they also emphasize how urgent it is to do so if we want a secure and a successful future. The world we operate in is evolving at extraordinary pace, and the global dynamics demand that we not only keep up but also excel. The evidence presented in this forum underscores that competitiveness is not a mere slogan. It is a strategic requirement for Uganda's growth. To seize the opportunities of the rapidly changing landscape, We must cultivate an environment that fosters innovation, efficiency, and adaptability. Uganda possesses an array of competitive strengths, ranging from its vibrant industrial spirit to its rich natural resources. Therefore, harnessing these strengths, coupled with the forward-looking government strategies that are not only responsive to current economic circumstances, but also lay the groundwork for sustained economic growth, stability, and fiscal sustainability, will be critical to determining our growth trajectory in the years to come. Embracing innovation is not just an option, it is a necessity. Innovations into clean energy like Killer Motors and into e-commerce showcase our potential to regionally lead in technology advancements, creating a ripple effect that elevates industries and livelihoods. As we begin to turn the corner on COVID-19, we must turn our attention on building the economy back better and climate smart. Our journey towards competitiveness also demands that we address our nation's unique challenges. We must empower our youth with skills and match the demands of the dynamic job market. We must prioritize women's economic participation and harness their potential in catalyst for growth. As a catalyst for growth, addressing inequality and ensuring access to economic opportunities for marginalized communities will not only amplify our competitiveness, but also reinforce the social fabric of our nation. Our economic blueprint must reflect our aspirations for a competitive and dynamic nation. Investment in education is an investment in our future workforce, a workforce that must be equipped with the skills and knowledge to navigate the complexities of the modern economy. Allocation of resources to research and development is not a luxury, but a necessity, for it is through innovation that we can unlock new growth frontiers and remain relevant in the changing world. Infrastructure, too, plays an integral role, expanding connectivity, efficient logistics, and reliable energy sources are the arteries that carry the lifeblood of our economy. A comprehensive and strategic approach to infrastructure development is critical, ensuring that we build the foundations for sustainable growth. Yet competitiveness is not a solitary endeavor. It requires harmonious and targeted collaboration between government, private sector, civil society, and international partners. Our fiscal policies must be designed to stimulate investment, encourage innovation, and promote inclusive growth. We must foster an environment where the private sector flourishes, driving job creation and expanding economic opportunities for all. Government's role is not just to regulate, but to facilitate, to be a partner in progress that enables businesses to thrive and societies to flourish. However, as we steer towards growth, we must do so with an eye towards sustainability. The necessities of competitiveness should not come at the expense of our environment. We must find the equilibrium that safeguards our natural resources while nurturing economic development. It is incumbent upon us to seek solutions that embrace renewable energy, sustainable agricultural practices, and responsible consumption patterns. The alarming climate change trends observed in Uganda and beyond raise concern of the new reality we must confront. Rising temperatures, increased frequency of extreme weather events, and vulnerabilities to climate change have become undeniable facts. The economic losses attributed to climate-related impacts are substantial and are projected to escalate if decisive and informed action is not taken. From reduced agricultural yields to disrupted infrastructure and diminished public finances, the damage is evident. It is worth acknowledging that Uganda is not alone in this struggle. Climate change affects countries across the globe, particularly those that are highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture, water, fisheries, and more. As we deliberate on the way forward, we must recognize that adapting to climate change and mitigating its impacts are inseparably linked to achieving sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction. These twin goals should be the cornerstone of our public policy framework. This forum has granted us the privilege of benefiting from expert insights and global experiences concerning the necessary policies and strategies for a more resilient and sustainable economic recovery. Our goal is to create economic systems that can withstand future shocks while fostering environmentally friendly and inclusive growth. Throughout our discussions, we emphasized the importance of cultivating competitive and climate-resilient supply chains in agriculture. We explored various measures and tools that Uganda can adopt to enhance our trade prospects and facilitate recovery in the wake of the pandemic. We also engaged in conversations about adapting to the rapidly evolving global energy landscape and how these shifts impacts on pursuit for Uganda's industrialization. Furthermore, we delved into the reforms needed to foster local and regional development with a focus on transitioning households from subsistence living to active participation in the market economy. The forum has also provided a valuable platform for critically assess the challenges and opportunities embedded within Uganda's economy, within Uganda's policy implementation landscape. This collective exploration has offered fresh perspectives on how best to navigate these complex dynamics as we work towards a more resilient and prosperous economic future. Ladies and gentlemen, while the task ahead of us is enormous, I am pleased that this forum has enabled us to build innovative ways to collaborate and share ideas on effective policies to meet the difficulties. What remains for each one of us, particularly those involved in the implementation of government programs, is to reflect on the forum's recommendations and incorporate them into our policies and work plans as we kickstart the planning and budgeting cycle for financial year 2024-2025. As the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, we pledge greater commitment to implementing critical recommendations from this forum and beyond, so as to deliver government programs and services in a timely and efficient manner. I also take this opportunity to call upon my colleagues in government to renew our commitment to the service of the people of Uganda. Once again, I thank all of you distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, for your invaluable time and contributions during this forum. I am optimistic that we will all leave here with a better understanding of what we need to do to accelerate growth and make more inclusive for Uganda's long-term development. We pledge to continue to engage you, our stakeholders, through this forum and other forums as we endeavor to transition our society from a peasant to modern and prosperous. With these remarks, I want to take this opportunity to declare this forum concluded. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for God and my country. We are done.
Ladies and gentlemen, surely we can do better. Another round of applause for the Honorable Minister and Professor. Professor, thank you so much for, opening our eyes. You've set a template for one of the civil society members. I think it's going to be easy for him going forward. He's found a partner who agrees with his narrative. And I will know where he's speaking his data from. Every time I have a conference and he's the one speaking, I'll know he's quoting you. Honorable Minister and the ministry team, I think Dr. Albert, I think the last 2 days, we should have given people certificates, masterclass certificates for the information we have received in the last few days. I think from here, both Honorable Victoria Sechitoleko and Mukunda, and all those who are here for all the days and all the sessions, every session, whether it was the productivity session, digital trade, whether it was domestic resource mobilization, every single session we had is a clear masterclass for all of us who attended, including climate financing, which my World Bank friend, Cynthia, was part of. And I think we deserve to appreciate the team that was behind this, the National Organizing Committee, the team that put this from the Ministry of Finance and IGC. Can we give them a round of applause for the very insightful content that was put together? Our biggest complaint is that there was little time for this content. We didn't have enough time for all the content that we were digesting. And so you've left us so much homework. We're going back to read, again, the same content that we've been digesting. But we really want to appreciate the team. Allow me to appreciate members of the Fourth Estate that have been sharing this information with the rest of the country. Can we put our hands together for members of the press and our production teams that have done a fantastic job broadcasting this for all our partners online and the television stations, UBC, NTV, and NBS. We want to thank you for this. And I want to appreciate again, with a special emphasis, the Ministry of Finance and IGC for making this very inclusive. So can we really appreciate them for allowing all of us come here together? And it's not every day that you have, the civil society in the same room, members of the academia in the same room, and you have our government officers, the technocrats that were moderating these platforms, and of course the heads of the different government agencies that are here. And we really want to appreciate our governor and the Commissioner General for making time. We know you're very busy people, but for joining us for this very critical conversation. A lot of the conversations we have, including yesterday, was what happens to the recommendations from these conferences? Does it reflect in the policies of government? And I'm glad the minister speaks to this, but also the PSST yesterday and earlier today said a lot of the recommendations that come through these forums and this particular forum speak to the policies government is taking. And I'm glad that even when I think one of the doctors was speaking here, he said a lot of the conversations we're having and the presentations being made across the board, whether it was under ICT or even local government, government has actually already put in place policies that speak to those conversations. And that what we need to do is tighten the loose ends. And I think, what Diakon has done, Professor, is just tell us to just be more efficient. Do the things you're doing, but do them better than you're doing them. And he told us to go back to 91 to 2011. We are going to reflect on a lot of this information, and we really appreciate that. So you now all deserve lunch. You've stayed with us quite long, so you all deserve lunch, and lunch is going to be served upstairs where we were yesterday. I want to request Shaka, if you're near here, to come and pick our minister and our representative of the High Commission, the British High Commission, and of course Dr. Jonathan and new farmer, Richard. Please allow them to walk out as the rest of us wait, and I'll request the Governor and the Commissioner General to join them. Members of the media, if we can provide space in the middle there, so that we can we move one of the cameras there? So you could join them. I think you're the first people to get lunch. Members of the press.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Did you know that our #1 value as a nation is to respect and protect the environment? With the current population increase